Gregory had long ago got used to relying only on himself and did not expect gifts from fate. When he got a call from the social fund for the homeless, he was visibly nervous. What do they want from me again? The deductions are regular. Recently, they have also renovated the House of Mercy, restored the hospice. Now the animal shelter was coming up. That's what Gregory thought, not even realizing that the appointment was for a completely different reason. At the same time, an employee of the foundation expressed a desire to come to the businessman in person. That was strange. Would it be about money again? And where to get it? They know that my father went bankrupt and left behind only a country stable with a couple of dozen horses. He pondered as he waited for his important guest. Gregory couldn't help himself. However, he couldn't refuse his hospitality. Knowing that Caroline could not cook, he had ordered from a restaurant in town and paid for the delivery. No. The check did not contain fabulous sums, just a little bit of everything. First, second. A couple of salads of fresh vegetables. Frankly speaking, Gregory never reproached his second wife that she could not cook. What's the big deal? She'll learn. And if she didn't, Gregory could cook as well as any chef. But there was no time for that now. He wanted to be a chef for a reason, but his late father insisted on business. Son, I'm sorry, of course, but you won't be recognized as a chef. What's in store for you? A job in some roadside eatery or, pardon me, a cafe. And then you'll get a job in a restaurant. You'll be in the kitchen all day and night in the stifling heat. And with that funny chef's hat on your head. That's when Dad's words really hit home. Why do you have to decide everything for me? What's wrong with me wanting to be a chef? Isn't that a man's job? Mr. Williams slammed his palm on the table. Of course it's not a man's job. You're about to become the head of the family company. That's better than your pies from the oven, you know. The father and son never had a proper conversation that night. The next day, Gregory gave up his thoughts of cookery and turned his mind to economics. Thinking back on it now, he felt out of sorts as his wife had gone to the beauty parlor for a manicure that morning. Gregory was left with setting the table alone. Of course, he could have welcomed guests over a modest cup of coffee, but that was unacceptable to him. Still, judging by the tone of the chairman of the foundation, the conversation was going to be difficult and rather topical. While Gregory was preparing all the necessary things, his 7-year-old son was always spinning under his feet, or rather, spinning. It was not an exact expression, because after the injury he had received a few months ago, Matthew could not walk and moved with the squeak of the wheels of a wheelchair. The boy kept a close eye on what his father was doing. Gregory was beginning to worry that the guest's visit was being delayed when the doorbell rang. The businessman winked at his son and went to open the door. Gregory was surprised to see an employee of the Social Security Fund on the doorstep next to a discreetly dressed girl in her 20s. "Hello. I thought you'd be alone." Mr. Leonardo smiled and obligingly nudged his companion forward. "Meet Linda." The girl blushed embarrassedly and lowered her eyes. Still not understanding what was going on, Gregory looked at his guest, but Mr. Leonardo seemed not to notice the question frozen in his eyes. Once inside, Gregory smiled and invited everyone to the table. Matthew wanted to be there too, to see what was going on. He had always been an inquisitive boy and liked to be near his father. His stepmother, on the other hand, was repulsive and nothing more. Once everyone was seated at the table, Mr. Leonardo got to the point. "Mr. Gregory, you see, here's the thing. The purpose of my visit is this. I want to recommend that you hire Linda." Gregory almost dropped his fork from his hands in surprise. "A job? But how can I hire her when my late father's company is practically bankrupt? And apart from the stables he bequeathed me, I have practically nothing left," he said. "Well, take the stable. You see, Linda's in trouble with the law and needs a good reference from her place of employment," Mr. Leonardo said without blinking an eye. Gregory looked again at the guest, who was blushing in shame. After thinking for a while, the businessman remarked, "But you do realize that working in a stable is not as easy as it seems, don't you? And there are a lot of horses. Have you ever done anything like that?" "No, I haven't. But I like animals very much," Linda answered honestly. "Oh, I love them too, especially dogs. But horses are nice, too," Matthew intervened in the conversation, which lightened the mood and made everyone smile. Linda also smiled, who had finally got used to the businessman's house and was not so afraid of every awkward movement or look. Seeing that Gregory was hesitating, Mr. Leonardo went on the offensive. You see, Linda has been given one last chance. If she stays with you for at least a month, the case will be closed. And if she doesn't, she'll go to trial. Probably won't get much, but that doesn't change the nature of the case. In her situation, even a suspended sentence could ruin her life. Gregory's heart shook and he turned his eyes back to Linda. Should he really give her a chance? After all, why not give it a try? And there really wasn't anyone to work at the stables. At that moment, Gregory looked at his son and saw a smile on his lips. Matthew nodded as if to say, "Let's take our chances, Dad. Don't be afraid. Auntie's nice, I can tell." Gregory smiled back and summarized, "Let's do it this way. A week's trial period. And then we'll see. I can't promise you a gold mine, but I'll give you enough to live on. Plus I'll help you with accommodation." Mr. Leonardo breathed a sigh of relief. "Well, that's good. It's the right decision, Mr. Gregory. Believe me, Linda is a very efficient employee. It's just that life has never spoiled her." Gregory nodded in agreement and looked at his son, whose eyes were literally glowing with delight. What did he like about Linda? It's amazing, he thought. In the end, Gregory and Mr. Leonardo agreed that tomorrow morning Linda would start work at the stables under the supervision of Mr. Nicholas, the elderly groom. Already at the door, she lowered her eyes in embarrassment and said, "Thank you so much for giving me a chance. I don't mention it. You don't know what you're asking for yet. There's so much work to be done. It'll make your head spin." Gregory dismissed it. "I'll do it. Honestly, I'll do my best. Don't look at me for being so thin. I'm strong enough for two." All right, I believe you. Come back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. But don't be late, please. We'll all be waiting." Gregory said goodbye and closed the door. At that moment, he felt relieved. So be it, he thought. He didn't hold out much hope for Linda. It's clear that people with a criminal record will promise anything when they're in trouble. "Dad, when are you going to take me to the stables?" Matthew asked. Gregory looked at his son and patted him on the shoulder. "I will. As soon as we get the place cleaned up a bit, I'll take you right away." "Yay. I want to see the horses so much," Matthew exclaimed happily. Gregory shook his head and went into his office. He made coffee, sat down at his desk and thought. His thoughts drifted back to a time when things had been very different in his life. And it all started about a month ago, when he received one very strange call. The call from a family notary had left him perplexed. An inheritance. Aren't you confused? Shortly before he died, my late father went bankrupt. I had almost nothing to inherit. And what was left to me was a stable, and not much in the way of. The voice on the other side of the receiver didn't change in tone one iota. "But that's not quite true, Mr. Gregory. Your late father managed to keep this stable hidden from his detractors, though not without difficulty. I don't know the real value of it, but on the other hand, it's better than nothing." Gregory wondered. Maybe the notary was right. After all, some inheritance was better than nothing, and in his present situation even more so. So Gregory didn't refuse and agreed to the meeting. The fact was that shortly before the fatal heart attack, his father, Mr. William Swan, had got into a very unpleasant story, which actually led him to bankruptcy. It was like a snowball. Everything was swept away in its path. Endless inspections, meetings with shareholders, and cancellation of contracts with trusted partners, all of which caused Swan's empire to collapse like a house of cards. "Don't, son, step aside. This is my concern. Believe me, there's a reason for all this trouble," Mr. William was saying. "Do you realize what's going on?" "Dad, we can't do this. We have to fight or we'll lose everything," said Gregory in despair, not knowing that they had already lost most of their assets. He didn't realize that his father had crossed the path of dangerous criminal elements, and now it would be impossible to retain his former position. only now left with nothing, Gregory realized what his father had warned him about. But this was not the only thing that made the young businessman despair. Shortly before his father's death, his favorite son Matthew, riding a bicycle, fell down unluckily and got a serious injury. At first, even the doctors didn't know what the consequences would be. But when Matthew moved into a wheelchair, Gregory understood everything. The shadow of disaster loomed over his family. An evil fate seemed to be stalking the Swans, seeking to deprive them of everything. Had I wronged anyone or mistreated anyone? Standing at his father's grave, Gregory repeated to himself. The businessman was bitter that everyone had turned their backs on his family, choosing to stay away from the man whose life was in serious trouble. For many people, it was like a contagious disease. If you lend a helping hand, you will soon find yourself in trouble. Gregory had no one to help him. His wife passed away a year after the birth of his son, an accident on the river. The culprits were never found. And were there any guilty parties? The current is rough, it's a dangerous place. Who knew he'd fall into the maelstrom? Gregory raised his son practically alone ever since. It was only 2 years ago that he decided to commit his life to a new woman. In general, Caroline suited him, smart, beautiful, kind, at least at first glance. What more could he ask for? But Matthew couldn't find a common language with her. It's understandable, 7 years old, her son doesn't understand much. When she heard that Gregory was preparing for a meeting with a notary, Caroline frowned. Why do you need that stable? What good is it? It's just an expense. And in our current situation, we have to save every penny. But darling, that stable belonged to my father. It's very important to me, especially since the competition hasn't gotten to it. And Daddy managed to keep it out of the shadows, Gregory objected. Well, that's for you to say. As far as I'm concerned, it's not worth a penny. I wish you'd sell it, sooner rather than later. Gregory shook his head. He didn't want to argue with his wife. Especially since he'd had enough problems lately. The fact was that Caroline had become accustomed to living large, and so she couldn't accept the fact that now she would have to reduce her expenses considerably. Gregory didn't blame her for that, for he had made her accustomed to a life of luxury. As they knew, one got used to a good life quickly. Sighing sadly, Gregory began to get ready for the meeting. To tell the truth, he hadn't quite decided what he was going to do with the stable. It would be a shame to sell it. It was the memory of his late father. It would be expensive to maintain, though he'd have to calculate everything to the last detail. Maybe we'll be able to come up with something. Behind him, the wheels of a wheelchair creaked. Gregory turned round and met his eyes with his son, who had decided to see him off. Dad, are you going to be long? Aunt Caroline says you're going to see the horses. The businessman thought for a moment, then said, Yes, son, my grandfather left us an inheritance. I'll go and see what's what. All right, Dad, just take some pictures. Okay? 'Cause I'd really like to see the horses. What are they like? Big, aren't they? I've seen ponies at the circus, but they're small. Matthew's words sounded so sincere that tears welled up in the corners of Gregory's eyes. The sight of his sick son made his heart ache. After all, what could be worse than a child being sick? Especially when you see everything and you can't do anything about it. Matthew's injury from the fall was complex, and the question of surgery due to the small age of the patient doctors did not even raise. Most of the specialists insisted on physical therapy and manual therapy. And to think so, they had very good reasons. At such an age, when children are actively growing, the probability of recovery is much higher than in adults, when the muscle tissue is already fully formed. So Gregory could only hope for the best and practice with his son until exhaustion. In this case, he repeatedly hired Matthew all kinds of carers or trainers in therapeutic gymnastics. But all of them, as a rule, did not stay long and were dismissed under various pretexts. Gregory didn't know the real reasons for this, though he guessed that it was not without the intervention of Caroline, who considered all the hired medical workers quacks and called Matthew a pretender. He's just lazy. He doesn't want to do physical therapy. It's so much easier for him to sit in his pram and do cartwheels. Life's a fairy tale. As soon as he opens his mouth, the goodies fall out. No, this is too much. Matthew's only 7 years old. He can't be acting like an adult. And it's hard on him. Anyway, Gregory made a good point that made Caroline bite her tongue. She didn't really want to help her stepson. Ideally, Caroline saw Matthew only in a wheelchair. It's a lot easier that way. She'd give Gregory an heir. And they're against the background of a healthy baby businessman, will immediately realize who he is closer and more dear. But Caroline had not yet been able to get pregnant. But she was not discouraged and waited for luck to turn to her. So the stable was located in the suburbs and was a rather large building. The notary was waiting for him at the gate, having parked his foreign car a little further away. He stepped out to meet Gregory and opened the massive gate. Wow, it's beautiful. Gregory couldn't help himself. Mr. Willie smiled understandingly. Yes, there really is a lot to see here, Mr. Gregory. There are several buildings adjacent to the stables, a clubhouse for guests to relax, terraces for parties and tea parties, places for training horses and pastures for walking. Also, please note the pond over there, see? Take my word for it, the water is crystal clear, and the horses won't drink any other water. Gregory's eyebrows rose in surprise. In truth, he had expected to see something less pompous, something familiar and simple, like the countryside. But here it was, a real splendor, worthy of royalty. His late father knew exactly where to put his money, said Gregory. The notary deliberately paused for a moment to let his client enjoy the view. Then he said, "Your truth, Mr. Gregory, your father was a very clever, far-sighted man. There's just one catch. You see, to run a stable properly, you need experienced grooms to look after each horse." Gregory looked at him in surprise. What could be the snag? Well, let them do it. I don't mind. Yes, that's the problem. All services cost money, and it's hard to hire an experienced groom these days. And it doesn't come cheap. Anyway, recently the staff of the stable went on strike and most of them quit, Mr. Willie replied sadly. Such news made Gregory uncomfortable. Well, that's interesting news you're telling me. Who's going to look after the horses now? Or are they going to starve to death? You can't do that either. The notary realized he'd said too much and tried to rectify the situation. No, Mr. Gregory. The horses are well looked after and well looked after. There's one groom left, but he's old. But his granddaughter helps him. Mr. Nicholas has been around horses all his life. He used to be a jockey. He competed, but then he injured his leg and gave up riding. Now he works in a stable. Your father left me a small sum to maintain the farm. I'll provide you with receipts for your records if you like. Can you check? There are all conditions for comfortable breeding of elite breeds of horses, from hay and grain of the highest quality to professional equipment, and an individually tailored training program. Gregory raised an eyebrow in surprise. One stable boy? That's ridiculous. Can you really keep track of all that? I can, Mr. Gregory. If it weren't for my injury, I'd have a dozen more horses in the stable, came a quiet, confident voice from behind the businessman. Gregory turned round and saw before him a trim older man of about 60 or so. Nicholas Smith. The stableman introduced himself immediately and held out his broad, calloused palm. Gregory Swan, you could just call him Gregory. The businessman mumbled confusedly and responded to the handshake. The elderly groom had an easygoing manner, so he quickly outlined to the new owner all the benefits of maintaining an elite stable. From Mr. Nicholas's words, it appeared that, if properly managed, the place could bring a good profit. For example, thanks to pre-purchase passes to the stables, customers could watch the morning feeding and care of the horses both in person and online with the help of many CAV cameras located throughout the area. Also, if they wished, guests could participate in training and horseback riding against the backdrop of the surrounding beauty under the guidance of experienced instructors. From the stableman's rather emotional story, Gregory immediately realized that the stables are not just a place for breeding and caring for horses. It was also a corner of rural beauty and coziness, where everyone could take care of the animals for a reasonable fee, forgetting about the hustle and bustle of the city. After listening to Mr. Nicholas's story, Gregory thought. What if it really wasn't so bad? Maybe it was worth a try. Looking into the stableman's eyes, Gregory asked directly, "And what do you need to run an efficient stable?" "Well, besides employees, of course. Feed, medicine, grooming supplies don't count." Mr. Nicholas answered almost immediately. "I need 1 or 2 employees, preferably physically fit, and animal lovers, of course. That's what this business is all about." "So, can the 2 or 3 of you handle all this?" Gregory expressed his doubts. The stableman smiled. "We can if we work together. But if you pick a bunch of idlers, it won't work. They only want money, nothing sacred in their souls." Gregory nodded understandingly. "All right, I hear you, Mr. Nicholas. I'll be sure to think of something." They parted as true friends. Deep down, the notary was glad. Mr. Willie still remembered his last conversation with the late businessman, who had asked him to help him keep the stables. To tell the truth, Mr. William was afraid that his son would sell everything and ruin the business at the very beginning. Fortunately, the fears were in vain, and the experienced notary realized this right from the first moments of communication with the new heir. It would be necessary to help with the workers, but where to get them? "Well, we'll think of something," Mr. Willie thought as he left the stables. Gregory, on the other hand, was returning home in high spirits. The prospects and benefits of developing the stables no longer seemed as elusive to him as they had before, and his father's acquisition looked very respectable. The elite breeds of horses and the picturesque location of the stable were worth it. "I'll have to bring Matthew here, and Caroline too," Gregory thought with a smile. Almost a month had passed since then, and he hadn't fulfilled his promise. And now, sitting in his office with a cup of coffee, Gregory realized that he couldn't go on like this, or he would lose not only the rest of the business, but also this long-suffering stable that was supposed to be his father's outlet. The next morning, leaving the house a little early, Gregory immediately noticed Linda, who was impatiently shuffling from foot to foot, waiting for him to arrive. "Why didn't you ring the doorbell?" "I would have made coffee." "How was I supposed to know you'd be here so early?" Gregory exclaimed in a low voice. Linda sniffed embarrassedly. "I was afraid I'd be late, so I decided not to take any chances." Gregory nodded understandingly and mentally gave her a plus in her book. He valued punctuality above all else, because he knew that such employees would never let him down in a difficult moment. Sitting down in the cozy interior of Gregory's foreign car, Linda literally sank into the voluminous chair, which seemed to her a huge throne. "Oh, it was so comfortable. You could fall asleep," she said. The businessman smiled, though he didn't really care about smiling. To tell the truth, he felt sorry for this girl, who was in such a difficult life situation, and who exactly was to blame for that, he didn't know. Throughout the journey, Linda sat silently, looking out the window with interest. Several times Gregory wanted to ask her a few leading questions about her childhood, but stopped himself and turned the conversation in another direction. Linda sensed that something was bothering the businessman and finally started first. "They wanted to convict me for theft, and they still do. I have a friend, but what friend? We met on the street. It's easier with just the 2 of us. Iris is very ill, but she doesn't want treatment, and she'll never agree to treatment." "That's not right. If you don't take care of yourself, no one will," said Gregory. Linda pouted her lips resentfully, but continued. "One day Iris and I went into a shop to buy something to eat. We had money, mind you, and Iris had just had a seizure." "What attack?" Gregory asked again. Linda sighed sadly. Tears glistened in the corners of her eyes. "Well, a seizure. Epilepsy. She's been suffering from it for a long time. You never know when the next time it's going to happen to her. And then it started in the shop. Iris fell down. She started seizing. I knew what I had to do. I turned her on her side so she wouldn't suffocate," she said. Gregory nodded sympathetically and slowed down involuntarily. A bitter tear slowly rolled down Linda's cheek. The kids in the shop started pointing fingers. "The mums say she's drunk and can't behave properly. But I knew she wasn't, you know. And some people started filming her on their smartphone cameras like it was a circus. but the person was really sick. Gregory was silent for a moment, letting her come to her senses, and then asked cautiously, "And then what happened?" Linda grinned bitterly. "Then what happened? Then we were accused of stealing. They said we stole a purse from one of the customers' pockets. They said we made it up on purpose and acted it out. They say pickpockets do that sometimes to distract attention. Well, that's obviously a lie, isn't it? There are witnesses, after all. I mean, what could have happened? Maybe the customer just dropped her purse somewhere. They didn't find anything on you." Gregory was indignant. "A lie, of course. But who cares? It's all plain and simple. 2 vagrants were planning to rob innocent people, and the eyewitnesses immediately stepped aside so as not to get involved. So the shop manager took us to the police. He said he saw me take the wallet out of my pocket. Who will the police believe? A businessman or a homeless woman?" Linda asked bitterly. Gregory thought for a moment. The story sounded unbelievable. But what was unbelievable when there were still such mean people as the owner of this shop? But when Gregory learned the reason for the businessman's behavior, he felt uncomfortable. "He's tried to set me up before. The cleaners in his shop can't hold on to their jobs because they don't pay enough. But for me, a girl from the orphanage, it would be enough. Well, I didn't refuse. I didn't like him right away. And the rich man, he must have a grudge and decided to take revenge," Linda said, barely containing her excitement. Of course, Gregory realized that justice was not always done in the world. But at last the stables came into view, and he caught himself thinking that he was happier than ever. When he saw it for himself, Linda could hardly suppress an exclamation of admiration. "What a beauty! How much is there here? There's a pond and pastures. And the horses." The girl's excitement was so genuine that Gregory couldn't help smiling. Soon Mr. Nicholas opened the gate and the car slowly entered the grounds. Today the elderly stable boy was here with his granddaughter Zoe. How had the 2 of them managed all this time? It was still a mystery to Gregory how much there was to do, and the staff used to be much larger than it was now. When Gregory introduced his new assistant, he immediately noticed the disappointment in the groom's eyes. The businessman interpreted this mute question to himself as follows. "Will this girl be able to cope? It's a man's job. Not everyone can do it." But Gregory only nodded affirmatively to Mr. Nicholas, making it clear that the matter was already settled. In the meantime, Linda met 10-year-old Zoe, who helped her grandfather more mentally than physically. In fact, the old man did all the work alone, cleaning the manure, cleaning the horses. And for old time's sake, he even rode some of them. Mr. Nicholas told all this as he went along. He caught at once the anxiety in the look of his frightened guest, and so interpreted it in his own way. He saw that Linda was wearing off-the-shoulder clothes, obviously bought at a sale, and her shoes were worn out. Taking a moment, Mr. Nicholas approached Linda and whispered softly, "Don't worry, darling. Everything will get better, and I'll help you in any way I can." She nodded gratefully, promising to work hard and honestly. But what impressed Linda most of all was the surrounding scenery. They were simply magnificent. In fact, the stable building itself was a masterpiece of construction art. On 4 sides, wooden columns supported the roof. It was made in the form of a graceful dome, which was visible from afar. The windows of the stable were covered with wrought iron bars for added security. According to Mr. Nicholas, wolves appeared in the area from time to time, which kept him from relaxing or letting his guard down. But what Linda liked best of all was the facade of the staff building, decorated with murals depicting horses and riders. Having familiarized himself with the local landmarks, Gregory started to head back. Linda waved goodbye to him, letting him know that she would not run away on the first day, and that she would be able to stay as long as she wanted. Gregory himself, however, didn't really doubt it. The conversation with Linda made him realize that this girl was a fighter by nature, and she would fight to the end. In the office, Gregory was waiting for another disappointment. The company's profit for the last month has almost halved, which led to a shortage of funds to pay wages. People are threatening to go on strike, and the firm is suffering even greater losses. the manager explained with concern in his voice. Gregory thought for a moment. Tell them not to worry. The money will definitely be there. I'll take out a loan and sell the car. It will be enough for a while, and then we'll see. The decision was not easy for the businessman. But what could he do when the bankruptcy process started since his father's reign? Mr. William must have crossed a very serious man. And now his son would have to pay the price. The working day stretched like a rubber band. Gregory had been offered more than once to sell the rest of the company for nothing, but he refused for the sake of his late father's memory. Who knew the value of every penny he earned? At lunchtime, Gregory received a call from Matthew, who was just starting to create his next creation. The boy had only recently become interested in the visual arts after an injury had confined him to a wheelchair. However, Matthew himself did not lose hope, and almost every day faithfully did therapeutic gymnastics. And every day he drew a miniature copy of himself sitting in a wheelchair. The boy did it for a reason, and his idea became clear not immediately. The thing was that every day he added a certain detail to the drawing, which, together with the previous drawings, was supposed to create a visual illusion of lifting from the chair. In fact, the boy used the same technique as many school children, drawing on each sheet of notebook, people waving their arms and legs. As he flipped over the pages, it gave the impression of their movement, which looked very funny and original. Matthew believed that one day he would be able to get out of the pram and walk like any other child. Gregory supported this aspiration in his son in every possible way and always went to meet it. Stepmother Caroline, on the other hand, regarded it all as an idle amusement. If she had her way, she would send Matthew to a boarding school for children with disabilities and visit him once a week. She was also annoyed at having to be around her stepson all the time. She hadn't done it before, but after Matthew had driven off the porch and nearly been hit by a passing car, Caroline had had to keep an eye on him. Now, when her son wanted to draw outside, she had to take him to the front lawn with a pencil and sketchbook in hand. Today, Matthew decided to draw a horse. The desire to get to the stables as soon as possible was so great that he was ready to go there right now. Too bad Papa wouldn't be happy. So he had to wait patiently for his father to suggest that he go to the country. After Caroline dropped off her stepson, she got down to business. First, she checked the contents of her husband's safe, taking a few notes. Then she went through his papers, which he had so recklessly left on the corner of the table. Caroline's interest was not accidental. Deep down, she'd long ago realized that her husband was slowly going downhill, which meant it was time to look for a backup. It wasn't her fault Gregory had turned out to be a wimp and a whiner. He can't even get her children. He's always worrying about his invalid. What good is he? He'll be painting birds and landscapes for the rest of his life. It wasn't the first marriage of convenience Caroline had experienced. What else could it be? The only thing is, Gregory didn't know any of this. And when he got home, he was met on the doorstep by his smiling wife. "Why do you look so tired? Is work not going well?" Gregory shook his head contritely. "I don't know what to say, Caroline. I finally took my assistant to the stables today. Mr. Nicholas will feel better now." Caroline curled her lips in contempt. "So you hired that inept girl after all? You've been conned again by that dodgy foundation man. But why are you being so categorical? Linda's not a fraud. It's just that she's had some bad luck in her life. Parents who drank, grew up in an orphanage. You can't help people like that," Gregory objected. "Dad, I drew a horse." "Look at this." Matthew came up to his father and held out the sketchbook. Gregory looked at his son's creation and involuntarily appreciated his growing talents. Of course, it was too early for an art exhibition, but on the whole it was not bad. "Well done, my friend. Tomorrow I'll take a day off work, and we'll go out of town together with you and Mum," Gregory announced, pausing for effect. "Wow, that's great. Dad, you're the best in the world," Matthew shouted and started driving around the living room, making funny pretzels on the pram. Caroline, on the other hand, immediately expressed her displeasure. No, 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 no. Feeding mosquitoes or cuddling with horses. No, 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 no. That's not for me. I'd rather go to a tanning salon with my girlfriends or swim in a pool. So you can go to your village now, but not without me." Gregory shrugged his shoulders and exchanged a meaningful glance with Matthew. Father and son understood each other without a word. If Mama didn't want it, it was up to her, and they would go to the horses. And while Mr. Gregory Swan's house was filled with confusion and scattered views, Linda worked hard to keep up with Mr. Nicholas. The experienced stableman knew horses like no one else and loved them with all his heart. The kind animals paid him the same favor, caressing him with their noses on his shoulder, or asking for a piece of apple or a sweet carrot. Horses are special. They understand everything, and they're so clever. Who knew? It's not for nothing they say a horse can smell danger. I grew up in the countryside. My father had a horse, but not like this, of course. It was just for work. So I once went into the woods with it. Got lost, of course. So she not only drove me back, but also smelled the wolves in time. "Save me, my dear," said Mr. Nicholas, stroking his black stallion dog. Linda smiled sincerely at the old man. "Why does he have such a strange nickname, Doctor?" "Usually they call him something else. Handsome, for example, or Star, for example. But here it's Doctor." The old groom looked at her carefully and said, "And I named this stallion because he has special abilities. Like a man, he can heal. About 6 months ago, a mare could not give birth. The foal was bigger than it should be. Anyway, I thought it was the end. But the doctor came and began to support the mare with his muzzle and started to laugh in his own way. And I looked. The mare calmed down, stopped trembling. And then the foal showed up. That's how it is. Believe it or not, that's exactly what happened." Linda smiled and looked respectfully into the kind, intelligent eyes of the horse. At that moment, it seemed to her that it was not a horse at all, but a human being looking at her. Despite the fact that at the end of the first day Linda was exhausted, she still enjoyed working at the stables. No one harassed her here, no one rushed her. If you get tired, sit down, rest and regain your strength, and then quietly do the work. No one would say a rude word. In moments of rest, Mr. Nicholas told stories about the time when he, as a young rider, participated in the races. Linda and Zoe loved these stories and listened to them with great delight. "I've had a lot of things in my life, good and bad. Horse racing is always big money. Underground bets were taking a lot of money. Many of my colleagues took part in it, gave in, so that the right horse would finish first. But I never went against my conscience, never betrayed either people or horses. Everyone was equal to me. But when I got injured, I realized that the sport was over for me," said Mr. Nicholas with a sadness in his voice. "And what did you do then? How did you live without horse racing?" Linda asked sympathetically. The stableman grinned. "Then what? Then I got an early retirement. I worked with horses at the racetrack for a while, taking care of them. And then I moved back to the village. My horse, named Prince, could not forget me. After my injury, he refused to recognize another rider. He threw off the saddle, kicked me with his hoof. They wanted to put him to sleep. I defended him. It's not right to forget champions. So I took Prince back to the village. The locals laughed at first, saying he was too thin. But the Prince knew his business. And then what happened to the Prince? Zoe broke the pause. Mr. Nicholas's eyes suddenly dimmed, and his fingers clenched involuntarily into a fist. They stole the Prince from me, looked him up at night, and took him out of the stable. He resisted, poor thing, but they tied a rope round his muzzle and took him away by force. They tried to take him away, but they didn't know the way, the wicked ones. No pity. So the Prince fell into the hole with his hoof. He got a fracture, of course. Those scoundrels abandoned him and left," he said. "I found the Prince. The shepherds helped me, but it was too late. The Prince was waiting for me, hoping for me, and then he saw me. Well, he didn't make it, Hardy." After this story, Linda could not hold back her tears, and soon she and Zoe were crying. The next morning, Gregory and Matthew showed up. The boy had prepared himself thoroughly for the trip out of town, taking several sets of clothes and a sketchbook. If he had his way, he would move away from his hated Aunt Caroline and stay here with the horses and the wise groom, Mr. Nicholas. When his eyes met the businessman's, the older man nodded approvingly and gave him a thumbs up. "She's a good worker, I can't say. I can see she'll do well, and the horses love her, and not everyone can deceive them." They can sense sincerity from afar, he said. Gregory smiled and helped Matthew out of the car. They were soon joined by their friends and Linda, who took him straight to the stables. Gregory, on the other hand, was troubled. The problems in the business were still weighing on him, depriving him of peace and balance. He was afraid to sell the business for good. Especially the prospects of earning money at the stables looked very vague and contradictory. He would be able to pay wages for a couple of months, of course. But what would happen next? Final collapse, bankruptcy, general disgrace. That's not how my father imagined it. Not at all, Gregory thought sadly. Lately, Caroline's demands have been increasing in arithmetic progression, and this despite the fact that her husband was in bankruptcy. Gregory tried to hint gently so as not to offend with an awkward word, but it was no use. Meanwhile, Linda and Zoe showed Matthew around the world of the farm and its surroundings. When he saw the cleanest pond, he immediately wanted to put it on paper. This made his companions smile with joy. Matthew also liked the doctor, who came up to him and touched his shoulder with his wet nose. "Look," he recognized the boy, Mr. Nicholas said with a smile. "What a nice horse." "He's a sight to behold," Gregory agreed. And then he asked, "Listen, Mr. Nicholas, do you think my late father put a lot of money into this stable?" The old groom recognized what the young master was getting at. Had he decided to sell the horses and the property? Mr. Nicholas cleared his throat for the sake of appearances and got to the point. "I'll tell you this, Mr. Gregory, your father has made a good investment for the future. Those horses are worth a lot of money. There's a fortune here. In fact, don't think your father hired me for nothing. I owe Mr. William my life. I mean, he paid for my operation. I had a joint replaced. Now I limp, but I can still walk on my own, without a stick or crutches." Gregory raised an eyebrow in surprise. "I didn't realize." "No, I realized that the price is not small, but to do something like that." The stableman suddenly took him by the shoulder and looked into his eyes. "Don't sell the stable, Mr. Gregory. I beg you by Christ, if only for the sake of your father's memory." Gregory's lips trembled and sweat beaded on his forehead. "I won't sell, Mr. Nicholas. I give you my word I won't sell," he said firmly. The stableman wiped the sweat from his forehead and hugged the young heir tightly. The rest of the day flew by. Matthew laughed contagiously and tried to play catch-up with Zoe, watching his son, who was developing merrily, going over the wheels of the wheelchair. Gregory caught himself thinking that it had been a long time since he had seen him so cheerful. And then there was the stallion. To Gregory's surprise, the horse was incredibly friendly and affectionate towards his son. He simply came to Matthew and stood quietly beside him, as if transferring his inner strength and energy to him. After such meetings, the boy began to feel an incredible mental uplift. His mood improved, and the pain in his back became less severe. Mr. Nicholas only chuckled, always repeating, "There's more to come." No one could say for sure whether the horse had the gift of a healer, or whether it was just a coincidence. When it was time to go home, Matthew tugged at his father's sleeve and asked quietly, "Dad, can I stay? Linda and the boys will look after me. Oh, and Mr. Nicholas too." Gregory looked into his son's eyes and saw a glimmer of hope in them. "You can, mate, but be careful, and don't go out in the heat." "Okay. And I'll call you in the morning, at lunchtime, and in the evening via video link. All right?" Laughs, "Yay, my daddy is the best daddy in the whole world," shrieked a joyous Matthew. Gregory got behind the wheel and waved goodbye. He felt a little uneasy, and no wonder it was almost the first time in his life that he had been away from his son for more than 24 hours. At home, Gregory was in for a scandal. It turned out that Caroline had already made inquiries through people in the know and found out the true price of the stable. The amount of money had finally pissed her off. "Gregory, darling, let's sell the barn and put the money into business." But what good would that do? Horses are better off than people. Where's that ever happened? The businessman's face immediately became rigid, with deep wrinkles on his forehead. "I won't sell the stable, don't even ask me. I inherited it. And my father wasn't the bankrupt that everyone thought he was. And he died a poor man," Caroline rebuked him, He's dragging us into debt with his horses." Gregory couldn't bear it any longer. With a loud slam of the door, he locked himself in his office and plunged into studying the accounts. "But don't expect to hide. No way. We're not the only ones. Do you really think I'm that stupid? Did you think I wasn't clever enough to know that the horses and stables were insured? Now imagine what would happen if all this stuff burned down. And you'd have to split the money in a divorce." Caroline hissed like a snake and went to her room. She found the idea of insurance so attractive that she was more and more inclined to take her fate into her own hands. A week passed, during which Matthew had settled down on the farm and had even begun to climb a little. Not on his own, of course, but supported on both sides by Zoe and Linda. And Mr. Nicholas put the boy in the saddle and, holding him behind his back, let him ride a lap. Of course, the boy was carried on his back by the doctor. That's him. Who else? After all, the stallion loved Matthew with all his heart. Every day, Matthew and the physician increased the load, leaving the boy in the saddle longer and longer. At the same time, the old groom and the girl were extremely careful and cautious. After all, the boy was only 7, and the load on his tender back had to be distributed evenly. The most interesting thing was that Matthew himself was crazy about horseback riding. The doctor carried him as gently as if there was a crystal vase in the saddle instead of the boy. Linda couldn't hold back a happy smile. And when Gregory saw it too, it was extremely difficult to describe his emotions. He had noticed his son's horseback riding quite by accident when he remembered about the XECT cameras installed all around the farm. Tears sprang from the businessman's eyes. It was a real miracle. His son Matthew was sitting in the saddle and kept his back straight. Yes, he was supported by Nicholas and Linda, but it was still progress, a step towards healing and a normal life. Unfortunately, Gregory didn't know that on this very day, Caroline had hired a gang of ex-cons to set fire to the stable at night to help her get her long-awaited payments. The scoundrel's calculation was simple. After the stable burned down, she intended to file for divorce to get her share of the money in the division of property. The whole thing would go off without a hitch. And for this, Caroline had spared neither money nor effort. She didn't even think about endangering the lives of Nicholas, Matthew, Zoe, and Linda. The lust for profit was so strong that it clouded Caroline's judgment, turning her into a true criminal. Late in the afternoon, the trio of bandits crept up to the stable building from different directions, holding torches. They set them on fire almost simultaneously. The fire did not break out immediately, but soon reached the walls and spread rapidly to the roof. The horses became visibly agitated. The mares began to beat their hooves. What are they doing? Has something happened? Nicholas thought and got out of bed. A fire flashed before his eyes. My God, what on earth is going on? Children, honey, get up quickly. There's a fire, shouted the elderly stable boy and hurried towards the closed gate. Linda and Zoe jumped up almost at the same time and started to help Matthew get dressed. Meanwhile, the fire was spreading with great speed. The heat was so intense that Mr. Nicholas's clothes almost burst into flames. The horses went into a frenzy, and the stableman's heart snapped with pain and pity for these beautiful animals. The lock on the gate stubbornly refused to budge because of the heat. Mr. Nicholas jerked back and in a second collapsed. The situation was becoming critical. Only a miracle could save the stable. Seeing the glow of the fire, the inhabitants of the surrounding villages immediately rushed to help, but it was too late. The farm was burning brightly, like a giant torch. No one knew the fate of the farm workers or the horses trapped in the stables. Gregory didn't get to the scene until the morning of the tragedy, when the fire service dispatcher finally found the farm owner's phone number. What? And my son Matthew's dead? Don't be silent. Say something. The hysterical businessman threw the phone receiver aside. Arriving at the smoking ashes, Gregory fell to his knees and wept. A little further away lay Matthew's charred wheelchair, which his father recognized at first sight. My son, my darling. Why? What could you possibly be doing? Here and there were firemen still pouring foam on the fire. Realizing that from now on his life was over, the businessman wandered towards the forest, not understanding where exactly he was going and why. The pain of losing his son was so sharp that it choked his chest, and then Gregory heard a strange sound behind him, definitely reminiscent of hoofbeats. Gregory turned around and was nearly knocked unconscious by what he saw. His son Matthew was on the black stallion, alive and well, and behind him, Linda, Zoe, and Mr. Nicholas were walking with a herd of horses. As it turned out later, the doctor kicked down the gate and saved the herd, and Zoe and Linda carried Mr. Nicholas out of the fire. Matthew, on the other hand, sat in the saddle the whole time and led the horses deep into the woods, where they sat out the entire fire. My darling son, alive," Gregory whispered tearfully and fell to his knees. The doctor cautiously came closer and put his nose on his shoulder. And what happened next was a different story. And it began with Caroline and her associates. As it turned out, the bandits had been caught on hidden camera before the fire broke out. The cameras themselves burned, but the video from them survived and was stored on a remote server. Caroline didn't resist for long, as her handmaidens gave her up completely. However, Gregory was not surprised by this later, once again appreciating his father's foresight. Subsequently, he restored the stables and started breeding horses on a professional basis. Gregory sold his company, and with his son and Linda moved closer to the forest. They were soon joined by Mr. Nicholas and Zoe, who had become attached not only to the elite horses but also to their owners. Gregory, with Linda's support, was going to treat people with musculoskeletal injuries on his farm, where riding horses would help them to believe in themselves and recover. It is said that after the fire incident, Linda and Gregory became practically inseparable. Does this mean that a stormy romance has broken out between them? It's hard to say, but judging by the sparkle in their eyes and their long walks in the evenings, they do have plans for a life together. How could you think of an old woman having a baby? Ashley, a blonde girl of 13, stood on the porch of the school and watched as her friend Emily, who was in the same class as her, talked to her older brother. Ashley dreamed now of being in her classmate's shoes and having a conversation with the guy. The girl had fallen in love with her friend's brother Jason last year, and she didn't even realize how it happened. Ashley just woke up one day with thoughts of this teenager, and after that she thought about the guy all the time. As soon as the girl realized that she had fallen in love, she started giving signs of attention to the high schooler. She planted unsigned love notes, but soon she, as a secret admirer, was exposed, and ridicule from Jason's buddy followed. Ashley felt strongly about it at the time. However, her mother Mary, who knew about her daughter's crush, told her to keep her mind off the guy. "You're still young, and it's far away. You're not in love, just a crush. As time passes, you'll laugh at your own crush." But a year had passed, and Ashley was still in love with Jason. And now she was standing there watching Emily's friend talking to her brother. Ashley, watching the conversation between the two, dreamed about how her lover would come to her and confess his feelings to her. The girl noticed her friend and her brother heading towards her. Ashley felt a slight shiver go down her spine. She tried to pull herself together. In the meantime, the pair approached her, and Jason said with a good-natured smile, "Hey you need to grow up a little." And then, looking back at the older kids, "Maybe you're expecting those words from me, but my sister has already told me that you are withering from unrequited love." Ashley, hearing those words, shuddered involuntarily, as if from a blow. The girl looked at her friend reproachfully, and then she turned and ran away. At the moment, she didn't care that she was acting like a cranky little girl. Ashley was annoyed by her lover's words. She was also hurt that her friend was secretly talking to her brother about her. Ashley ran and heard Emily asking her to stop and talk. However, the girl was not responding to her mate's cries. Ashley wanted to run home now, lock herself in her room, and let the tears flow, which soon happened. When the girl calmed down, she made a vow to herself that she would not talk to her friend again, and she also promised herself that she would tear her love for Jason out of her heart and would not look in his direction again. And when Mary's mother came home from work, Ashley pronounced to her, "I don't hang out with Emily anymore. So if she comes over, just tell her I'm not here." "What'd you get? It's no big deal. You'll make up in a couple days. By the way, what was the fight about? What was it about?" "It's a long conversation. Emily's a traitor." "That's a pretty big thing to say. You can't make such serious accusations against a man, especially since Emily is your friend." Why don't you tell me what happened?" Mary said affectionately and sat down next to her daughter. Ashley looked at her mother carefully, then excitedly told her what had happened. The woman listened to her daughter, and then she patted her head and said softly, "Your friend cares about you. She wanted to do you a good favor. Emily thought that talking to her brother about you might help draw the boy's attention to you. But what her friend didn't realize was that you can't command the heart. If Jason doesn't care about you, there's nothing you can do about it." Mary paused for a moment. Then, with a sad sigh, she said, "You surprised me, daughter. I thought you weren't thinking about Jason anymore. You're getting a little secretive. Or is it my own fault that I don't notice anything but work?" "Mom, don't say that," Ashley said. "I'm not hiding anything from you, I just don't want to worry you. You really work so hard that I don't want you to worry about me. Taking care of you is the best part for me. You're the only one I've got. And you have to work hard for one simple reason: you need money. Your grandparents on my side of the family are long gone. Your father divorced me 2 years ago and forgot about the obligation to pay child support. And your grandparents on your daddy's side don't need you. Why not? You see, daughter, in some families it happens that parents have 2 children and one child becomes the favorite. That's what happened in your daddy's family. He didn't become a favorite from mom and dad, and as a result they don't need you as a granddaughter. If before the divorce with your father they still congratulated you on your birthday, now it does not happen. And you know it yourself. Mom, you always told me that you and Dad got divorced because that's how life works. How does it happen?" Her daughter asked her mother in a low voice. Ashley had longed to know the answer, but there had never been the right occasion for such a conversation. Mary sighed softly, put her arm around her and said, "You're getting older and older every day, and I don't even notice it. Well, I'll answer your question. Your father fell in love with another woman who gave him a child, the son he dreamed of. So he made a choice, but not in our direction. Just don't blame him or judge him. Life is complicated. You'll realize that later." After talking to her mom, Ashley felt a lot better. She even took her mind off the fact that she was upset with her friend. The girl kept thinking about the relationship between her parents, and also pondered how she would act in her mother's situation. And in the evening, when Emily called to apologize, Ashley interrupted her and said that she was no longer offended. But she added, "Now it's nothing personal. I won't trust you, or you'll tell the whole world." Time moved on, and now Ashley was 16. The New Year's Eve ball was coming up. The girl carefully thought over her closet for these holidays. She hoped that her friend's brother would come to the ball. Ashley told Emily that she had invited Jason to the event, and Ashley, against all odds, secretly continued to love Jason all this time. And now the girl is already in the auditorium where the New Year's Eve ball has begun. She looks around, hoping to see her lover. Ashley nervously corrects the gatherings on her cornflower-colored dress. The girl had seen this outfit in the store a long time ago, and her mother went to meet her needs and bought it without paying for utilities. Ashley knew about all this, and when the purchase was made, she was nervous because she knew how sensitive they were to late payments. But she wasn't thinking about that now. She wanted to see Jason and to win him over with her appearance. For some reason, she was sure that would happen. Ashley was not fooled in her expectations. Slow music started playing and the DJ announced a white dance. A classmate approached the girl to ask her to dance. Ashley smilingly wanted to point out that the ladies were now choosing the suitors while agreeing, as she suddenly noticed Jason, who had just walked into the auditorium with a buddy. Ashley smiled at her classmate and bluntly refused the offer to dance. The girl fixed her blonde curls, headed toward Jason, walked up to the young man, smiled radiantly, and spoke amiably. "Perhaps tonight your highness will indulge us in a dance at the New Year's Eve ball." Jason looked at the girl, although he saw her at school every day, but on weekdays she seemed to him to be an ordinary schoolgirl who was not different from her peers. Basically, the guy just didn't pay attention to Ashley. But at that moment, she stood in front of him, as if she were a chic woman who had stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. Jason looked at Ashley and couldn't understand how in one day she could transform herself so much. He couldn't help but voice his thoughts aloud. "You're like a fairy tale, from an ugly duckling to a beautiful swan. I can't believe I'm standing in front of Ashley, the same Ashley who's been bugging me for years with her crushes. Are you going to grumble or dance with me when the music stops? He said with a smile. Ashley didn't say anything else, but simply stepped toward Jason. Soon the couple was dancing. Ashley couldn't believe that she was being embraced by the man she dreamed of for so many years, that he would notice her in some way. And Jason continued to marvel at how much his sister's friend had changed. The dance ended. Ashley hurried over to Emily. Jason tried to hold her back, but she just smiled back and headed toward her friend. Emily winked at her friend, but she waved back and sat down on a bench. The music in the room was energetic. Ashley watched the dancers and occasionally glanced at Jason, who was also watching her. At one point she looked at the guy again, but he was gone. She looked around confused as she suddenly heard the DJ's announcement. This beautiful tune one man dedicates to a beautiful girl named Ashley and asks her to dance. Before Ashley realized what was being said, Jason appeared in front of her and held out his hand. Jason offered to dance again, and soon the couple was dancing to a beautiful melody. They danced together more than once that night, and when the New Year's Eve ball was over, Jason volunteered to walk them home. The couple walked down the snowy road, holding hands. At first they were silent, unable to find the right words. But when they reached the girl's house, Jason suddenly turned Ashley toward him and said quietly, "Will you be my girlfriend?" Ashley laughed, then showed her boyfriend her tongue and hurried toward the house. Jason frowned. "I don't see what's so funny. I'm serious." After he said that, the girl stopped and then walked leisurely back toward Jason. Once next to him, she looked into his eyes and whispered, "Do you know how much I want to tell you right now? How long have I waited for you to notice me? I've endured your friends' taunts, your condescending attitude toward me, as if I were a juvenile who couldn't be taken seriously. And now you're just offering to be your girlfriend. How do I know tomorrow it won't be another joke to amuse my friends?" "Ashley, what are you talking about?" "Yeah, there was a time when I made fun of you, but this is serious. I really want you to be my girlfriend, and I promise that no one will hurt you now." Ashley smiled, waved, and headed home. Jason didn't stop her. Once inside, the girl was greeted by Mary's mother, who saw who was seeing her daughter off. Mary asked how the ball had gone, but all she heard in response was, "Fine." The woman came over and hugged her daughter gently, but Ashley suddenly snuggled into her shoulder and cried. Mary held her tighter against her, and when she calmed down a little, she said softly, "Jason's been paying attention to you. And you don't believe him? Or is there another reason you're crying? For you, Jason was like conquering a summit. Ashley was going for it. And this is the finale. What's he got going for him? Mammoth, what are you saying? I really love Jason. What finale?" Ashley shouted indignantly and broke free from her mother's embrace. It was at that moment that the mother realized that her daughter had actually fallen in love with the guy. The woman only softly mouthed in response, "That's how you know what the feeling is. Look, just don't lose your head." The next day, Jason met Ashley after school and then walked her home. And from that day on, the two began to see each other differently. They tried to meet at every spare moment to be together. A month later, Jason confessed his love for the girl. Time passed, and Jason graduated from high school, after which he was soon drafted into the army. Ashley knew perfectly well that the lover initially wants to serve, wait until he turns 18, and after that to sign. The girl was not against the decision of the chosen one. Especially the decision of the guy pleased Jason's parents and Ashley's mother, who wanted the young people not to hurry with a trip to the registry office. Jason served and returned home. He enrolled in college and Ashley was in the 11th grade. Young people continued to meet and dreamed that soon they would become a married couple, which soon happened. As soon as the girl graduated from high school and she turned 18, the couple legalized the relationship. Ashley enrolled in college at the commodity manager. The newlyweds moved in with Mary. The woman insisted on it. Life itself slowly flowed further. Initially graduated from the school Jason, who got a job immediately on specialty. Afterward, Ashley received a specialty. She, too, got a job. Now the young woman dreamed that they had a child. But several years passed, and she could not get pregnant. Ashley became anxious about it. She was examined, as well as her husband, and soon Ashley received the verdict that she and her husband had different Rh factors, and it would be difficult to conceive a child. The doctor also added, in your case, getting pregnant under this circumstance will not be easy. I can add that the probability of conceiving a baby is equated to 20% out of 100. However, you can do IVF. That is my advice to you. Ashley was dumbfounded by the doctor's news, but she didn't lose hope and offered her husband to do the required procedure. The young woman piously believed that her spouse would agree to it, but Jason took the proposal of his wife in the bayonet. The man responded by saying everything should be like a normal married couple, without the intervention of any newfangled procedures. Ashley had a hard time with her spouse's answer, but she didn't want to contradict it. She still hoped that the doctors might have made a mistake. The young woman had even enrolled in medical school by correspondence. Ashley now wanted to become a midwife to figure out for herself why she could not get pregnant from her loved one. However, due to the fact that the lady could not conceive a child, scandals began to occur in the family. Jason, if initially veiledly accused his wife that she could not have children, then soon began to openly accuse the chosen one that she was empty. All the excuses of Ashley, who said that she could not get pregnant not only because of her fault, were reduced to zero. Jason blamed only his wife. Soon the man began to stay late at work. Ashley was worried, nervous. She did not want to lose her favorite person. However, family life imperceptibly shipwrecked, and one day Jason came home and began to pack his things. Ashley watched her husband in silence at first, and then she mumbled, "What are you doing? Can't you see? I'm leaving you. I have a woman. I'm sorry, she's expecting a baby. You have to realize we're not right for each other. It happens. I'm sorry. But we've only been together 4 years. Other couples have been together for decades and they don't have kids. And then a baby is born. Maybe you're right. But there's one thing. There's another woman expecting a baby from me, and she doesn't have to wait 10 years to get pregnant. Ashley and Jason should get a divorce, as each of them would be better off with a separate life. I'm sorry, but I have to explain to you the simple truth when you yourself understand everything perfectly well," the woman replied quietly, realizing that it was pointless to hold her husband back. He had made up his mind. Ashley looked sadly at her spouse after these words and left the house. She didn't want to see the man she loved packing his things to leave for good, which soon happened. A month passed after Jason left his wife. During that time, he came to Ashley's house only once to pick up the rest of his belongings and to tell her that he had filed for divorce. Ashley took it calmly, realizing that nothing could be changed. She only wished her ex-husband a happy farewell. Time passed. 3 years passed after the divorce. During this time, Ashley graduated from medical school, got a job in a hospital. Personal life of a young woman did not add up, although representatives of the stronger sex tried to look after her. However, Ashley was indifferent to the attention of men. Her mother was worried about this and repeatedly said, "Daughter, you can't do this. You do not think about your personal life. So many years have passed after the divorce, and you do not even want to accept the courtship of a decent man. I'm talking about Max, who lives across the street. He's been trying to get your attention for months. And you're not paying attention, Mom, you're not paying attention. Can we not start your favorite topic about my personal life?" Ashley said irritably and looked at her mother reproachfully. Mary shook her head sadly in response. A little over a month after her conversation with her mother, Ashley was coming home after work. She wondered if she really should accept her neighbor's advances. The woman went over the merits of her beau in her mind. Ashley was so engrossed in her thoughts that she didn't immediately hear the question. She looked at the brunette and said softly, "Yes, did you say something? I asked you where Takaya Street 63 was. You're going the wrong way. You need to turn left, and then a few houses later, another left." After that, Ashley was interrupted by a laughing stranger. "I've never been sent this far in my life. Why don't you have some time and draw me a route on a piece of paper?" "I'd rather walk you than draw it," Ashley said with a smile. "Can I really expect such a beautiful woman to be my guide? This is my lucky day, and I have good luck in all things," exclaimed the stranger cheerfully. Ashley didn't answer, turned the other way and walked away. The man followed her, telling her why he was in this town. From the story of the new acquaintance, who introduced himself as Alex, Ashley learned that he came here for construction, rented a place on an ad, and earned a little money. Ashley also learned that Alex was married when he was 30 years old, but the family life did not work out, and he and his wife separated by mutual consent. Hearing about the divorce, Ashley involuntarily remembered the breakup with her ex-husband. She thought that she had no relationship left with Jason after the divorce. The ex-spouse had simply packed up and disappeared from her life. The woman only heard news about him from his sister. Thinking about it, Ashley smiled sadly, which didn't escape her new acquaintance. "Why are you sad?" "I guess I'm not a good conversationalist," he said. "It's all right, we're almost there. Now you need to turn into the alley, and there you will find the right house. We are happy to help you. Let's say goodbye." "Wait, I'm not ready to let you go right away," Jason said. "Why don't you let me meet you? Or is there another way? I'll have fun now, and then you can take me to a better cafe where we can continue talking. I have to work today and I'm a little tired." "Yes, and you from the road need a break." "Whatever you say," Ashley said. "Let me give you my phone number and we'll call tomorrow and you can tell me where to go. One more thing. Why don't we go back to being on a first-name basis?" "Okay," she replied politely, then dictated her phone number and waved her hand to her new acquaintance. She turned around and hurried home. When Ashley got home, her mother came to her and anxiously asked why she was late after work. The woman hugged her mother affectionately and told her about the encounter. "Honey, what's wrong with you?" Mary exclaimed fearfully. "Were you sensible when you went with a stranger alone to see him off? What if this man was a criminal, and it was a planned operation to rob you, or even worse?" "Mom, don't panic," Ashley stopped her. "We live in the 21st century. First of all, I'm not beautiful enough to make a man want me at first sight. Second, I don't look like I have a lot of money. You can see it in my clothes, I don't wear brand name clothes. And third, Jason doesn't look like a gangster. I hope you're convinced by my arguments." Still, it was reckless. Mary sighed. "Promise me you won't do it again." "I will, Mommy," she said with a smile and hugged her mother. A few days later, Ashley met with Jason. The couple chose a small, cozy cafe to talk. The young people made an order, and then Jason asked her how things were going on the personal front. She laughed contagiously when she heard the question, and Jason was puzzled by it. "Your question about my personal life was inappropriate for the situation," Ashley explained. "If I had a boyfriend or was married, would I be sitting with you right now? Of course not. Let's just say that I was married at one time. But it didn't work out for the same reasons you are. We drifted apart. So I'm waiting for my prince to appear on the horizon. Could that be you?" "I don't know. It's too early to tell," Jason said. "It's only the second time we've seen each other. And we don't know each other. I want to tell you right away that I'm not going to get you into bed right now. Sex isn't the most important thing to me when I'm with a woman, although I don't deny that it's important too." "That's honesty," Ashley said thoughtfully and turned the conversation to another direction. After that date, the couple began to call and see each other frequently. 2 months after meeting Jason, Ashley introduced him to her mother. Mary was charmed by her daughter's gallant suitor and informed Ashley about it. "I like Jason myself. I think I'm in love." "That's wonderful." Her daughter smiled. "Has he proposed yet?" "No, he just said that I was his one and only. But you know that men are ready for beautiful words just to get into bed. I'm more interested in actions, not sweet talk." "Then I'll talk to him about it," Mary decided. "But don't do that. I'm going to be 30 in a couple years. Do you want to organize my personal life for me?" Mary smiled at her daughter's words. She didn't say anything in response. However, the older woman took it upon herself to talk to Jason about it. When Jason came to visit again, the landlady offered to have a private conversation with her under a plausible pretext. Jason was surprised by Mary's request. Soon the older woman and the man were sitting in the kitchen while Ashley ran to the store at that moment. Mary had specifically asked her daughter to go get the hammer so she could be alone with Jason. And as soon as Ashley closed the door behind her, the lady of the house asked, "Man, are you going to live your life as a guest? I mean, do you intend to marry your daughter? Are you just going to take me on like that?" Jason replied, bewildered, not expecting a conversation on the subject. In the meantime, Mary asked tricky questions that were directed in one direction only when Jason would propose. Jason's answers were slurred. Then he rose abruptly from his chair and said firmly, "I love your daughter, but can she and I decide when we should marry? I respect you, but I just didn't want to be told what to do and when to do it." "Jason, I'm not interfering with your relationship. It's just that you're not seeing the basics. You don't see Ashley changing from the unknown. I get the impression that your daughter is beginning to doubt your feelings for her." "Are you serious?" Jason asked, puzzled. "I couldn't be more serious. You talk to her about marriage, and then you'll understand," she said with a sad smile. A few days passed after that conversation. Mary was glowing in the kitchen. She knew that today her daughter should come with her boyfriend after work. The older woman cooked pilaf that day and pondered how much longer it would take Jason to propose. The landlady had set a table in the hall. She didn't like to huddle in the kitchen when guests came over. At the moment, Jason was still a guest to her, since he was not a groom. Mary put the plates on the table as she heard the front door open. The woman hurried into the hallway, where she saw her daughter entering with Jason. The man politely greeted the lady of the house and then handed a bouquet of scarlet roses with the words, "I have proposed to Ashley and she has agreed to be my other half. Now it's up to you. We want to hear you say your blessing." "Who else among us is taking the bait?" said the old woman with a grin in response. She winked conspiratorially at the man, which embarrassed him, for he remembered that he had recently addressed that word to the lady of the house. Meanwhile, Mary smiled cordially and said, "Of course I bless you. You young people have pleased me today. I hope that soon I will hear the guests shouting bitter." "You won't hear that, because we will quietly sign without any celebration. We're not 18 years old enough to have a big party," Ashley said quietly, glancing at the groom as if to suggest that he agree with her. Jason did. Soon the marriage took place. Jason came to live with his wife. Ashley was happy that she had found her happiness as a woman because she truly loved Jason. Her husband reciprocated. Mary, looking at the newlyweds, only wished them long happiness and health. Imperceptibly after the wedding, 2 years flew by. The couple occasionally had a few misunderstandings between them, but it concerned all everyday things, something Ashley didn't have time to do around the house or Jason. And at such times the couple expressed their discontent with each other. But such spats were settled the same day, and the couple went to bed reconciled. Ashley was satisfied with everything in her life except one thing: she couldn't get pregnant. Every day she called herself an outcast more and more often. One day, coming home after her shift, she walked into her bedroom, threw herself on the bed, and burst into bitter tears. Her mother came to the crying and sat down next to her daughter. The elderly woman guessed the cause of her tears. She stroked her daughter's head affectionately and said quietly, "Why are you getting upset? Don't cry, my girl. Apparently it's not yet your time to be a mom." "What are you talking about? What time is it?" "I'm already 30. Soon I won't even know what pregnancy is. I know labor is when a baby is born. But what if my husband comes a year from now and tells me he has a woman expecting a child with him? I've been there before. What do you say to that, Mom?" "First of all, calm down. Don't think about your ex-husband. He probably didn't love you enough to look outside of you. And as for Jason, he's not that kind of man. Jason loves you. I can see the way he looks at you and would do anything to make you happy with him. If he's willing to do anything, why not get checked out by the doctors? I've told him that more than once, and Jason just looks at me with sadness," Ashley tearfully told her mother. "He looks that way because it's impossible to talk to you about this topic. Jason actually wants to get a checkup. There's nothing wrong with his health. But he's not talking about it for one reason only. Jason's worried that you're stressing yourself out about not being pregnant. That's your reason. Think about it. Why is your husband keeping quiet about the checkup?" Ashley stopped crying after her mother's words and thought for a moment. She was silent for a while, thinking about what she had heard, and then she turned to her mother, suddenly buried her face in her chest and said quietly, You can't imagine how bitter I feel now. I thought I was suffering alone. But it turns out that you are also worried about me. And also, Mom, it's getting harder for me to go to work every day. Let's take today's case, for example. We had a young girl admitted a few days ago. She just turned 18. She gave birth to a boy today. And now she's giving up her son because her boyfriend doesn't want children. You know how jealous I am. You can't even imagine. She's lucky enough to be a mom. Even in a situation where her boyfriend doesn't want kids. I'd have a baby if I were her. I'd give the guy my resignation. That's what I told her today. But she told me to stay out of her personal life. Daughter, don't try that girl's situation on yourself. You have your life, she has hers. Now try to just calm down or Jason will come over and worry about you. Okay, thanks for the support. I needed it, her daughter said quietly. Life slowly moved on. It had been 3 years since Ashley's wedding. The woman no longer hoped that she would ever become a mother, but she still had that hope in her heart. However, Ashley did not say it out loud. On the contrary, she told her husband more and more often that their family was incomplete. These statements only caused Jason more heartache, for he knew how much she dreamed of having children. When the conversation about the family being incomplete, Jason couldn't stand it and angrily asked his wife to shut up. Ashley, hearing her husband's tone, was frightened, because in such a way her husband had never allowed her to talk to him like that. When Ashley's first shock passed, the woman said, "All this is because I can't give you an heir. Stop it, please. That's not what I'm tired of. It's that you're making an issue out of the wrong place. I understand that you dream of having a child, as every woman does. But why do you keep talking about it? We've only been living for 3 years, which means we have to wait a while longer." Before the husband could finish his sentence, he was angrily interrupted by his wife. "Shut up. My first husband said the same thing to me." And what happened in the end? He found a woman who bore him a son. He didn't cheat while he was still married, all because I couldn't get pregnant. And that was the only reason I went to medical school, to become a midwife back in the day. To find out the real reason why I couldn't have children. Wait, but you told me that your divorce was because, as they say, you didn't get along. I lied. And now you know the truth and you can roll. I'm not holding you, Ashley yelled hysterically. She was about to throw their family picture at her husband as her mother Mary entered the room. Mary gave her daughter a stern look and then quietly asked Jason to leave. The man didn't object and complied with his mother-in-law's request. Once the older woman was alone with her daughter, she sat up to Ashley and spoke softly. "Aren't you ashamed of throwing a tantrum here? I understand that you're nervous, but what does this have to do with your husband? You're torturing yourself and him. Do you want that? Enjoy your life. You love each other, and you'll still have a daughter, take my word for it." "But when, Mom?" "I said she will, so she will. We just have to be patient." I've heard those words many times before. How long do I have to wait? The gynecologist told me that everything is fine with my husband's health too. But I'm still not getting pregnant after saying that. Ashley abruptly got up from the couch and ran out of the room. Immediately she ran into her husband Jason, who was looking at her with a sad look. The woman walked briskly toward the exit. Jason wanted to follow, but his mother-in-law stopped him, saying, "Don't follow Ashley. Let her get some fresh air, let her calm down. And in a motherly way, I suggest you go to church with your wife and pray. Ashley's already been there. I suggest you both go. Trust me, Jason, it won't cost you anything." "Okay, Mary," Jason replied. Some time passed. Ashley was at work in a pensive mood. The woman's thoughts were preoccupied with the fact that her menstrual cycle had gone astray. Ashley's pensive mood was noticed by the doctor on duty and asked what was going on with her. Ashley was embarrassed by the question but still told what was bothering her. The medical officer laughed upon hearing the answer and said reproachfully, "I marvel at you, woman. Take you at least, Ashley. Where do you work?" "In a maternity hospital. A midwife." "Exactly. When symptoms like these arise, where should a woman go? And given that you're also a medical professional, what are your thoughts?" "Okay. You don't have to answer that. I can see by the look on your face that the answers to the questions have occurred to you. Let's go. I'd better check you out." After a while, Ashley came out in a happy mood. The doctor informed her that she was pregnant. Upon learning the wonderful news, Ashley immediately called her spouse and then her mother. Soon she was registered at the antenatal clinic. The woman spent the first trimester in the hospital. Then the pregnancy developed without complications. And soon Ashley gave birth to a baby girl at term. The newly married parents named their daughter Amber. The couple was in the seventh heaven of happiness that they had a child. Rejoiced at this event and Ashley's mother. The woman immediately noticed that after the birth of her daughter, as if blossomed. This was noticed not only by Mary but also by neighbors, who at every opportunity said to the elderly woman how Ashley has become more beautiful after the birth of her daughter. She's glowing from the inside out with happiness. We're so happy for you. Thank you, Mary replied, and immediately recited the Lord's Prayer to herself. The old woman was afraid that with such words people might inadvertently jinx her daughter's happiness. Meanwhile, Ashley was enjoying her new role as a mom. She enjoyed fussing with her baby, singing songs, putting on her baby's cradles, feeding her baby formula from a bottle. Ashley did her best to take care of her daughter, which sometimes frustrated her mother. Mary also wanted to nurse her granddaughter, so she would occasionally say to her daughter with a sad smile, "You're like a hen. You don't let anyone near you. And I am not a stranger to the baby. I want to babysit the baby too." "Oh, Mom, Amber is my little angel. And I'm just afraid to part with her even for 5 minutes," Ashley replied. Time passed and the girl turned 3. Mary started talking about putting Amber in kindergarten. Ashley immediately flatly refused the offer, which caused her mother's bewilderment. The old woman looked at her daughter with incomprehension and said that the child needed to start contact with her peers. Ashley, hearing her mother's words, replied that she would go with her daughter to the playground where the kids were walking. Mary did not insist any further, realizing that Ashley would not be persuaded. After that conversation, a couple months flew by. Ashley walked with Amber in the public garden. The woman watched her daughter digging in the sand with her peers. Suddenly, Amber grabbed a child's shovel and knocked the girl on the head with it. The little girl cried and ran to her mother. Ashley felt bad about her daughter's behavior and approached Amber to reprimand her. Frowning her eyebrows, the mother said, "Girls." Ashley was outraged at her daughter Amber's behavior in the sandbox. She took the trowel from her and gave it to another girl, apologizing. Ashley then said the walk was over, which displeased Amber. At home, Ashley told her husband Ben what had happened. Mary, Ashley's mother, upon hearing the story, stated this is still the flowers. The berries will come later. What you don't realize, Ashley, is that your daughter lives a reclusive life and thinks everything should be done just for her. You lack discipline, and as a mother, you're indulging your child in everything. Can't you see that the girl is turning into a little selfish girl? What are you talking about, Mom? Amber is a wonderful girl. You're just looking for faults in her that aren't really there, Ashley replied. Mary turned reproachfully to her son-in-law, Ben. Why don't you say something? Amber is your daughter, too. Don't you notice anything strange about her behavior? Ben grumbled and hurried away so as not to continue the conversation. In the evening, Ashley put her daughter to bed and then joined her husband in the bedroom. Maybe Mom is right about Amber growing up selfish. After all, sometimes she doesn't ask, she demands to buy this or that toy, she said thoughtfully. I don't know what to answer. Maybe our daughter needs a little brother or sister, Ben suggested. Well, let's do that now, he said with a smile as he hugged his wife. Honey, I'm serious. Maybe we really should listen to Mom and put Amber in daycare, Ashley replied. You know, I agree with that. Mary is retiring soon. Her allowance will be small. Our family budget is going to become quite paltry, and we need to repair the roof, its finances. If you get a job, we'll have extra income, Ben reasoned. A couple weeks later, Amber was enrolled in kindergarten, and Ashley went straight to work. At first, Amber was cranky and refused to go to daycare, complaining about her stomach or her leg. Lily believed it at first, but then realized that her daughter was being sly to avoid going to daycare. Ashley had a hard time convincing Amber to attend. When Amber stopped being cranky, other problems began. Caregivers complained about her behavior, saying she was acting arrogant and hurting other children. Ashley gave her daughter educational talks, but the complaints continued. Once again, when Ashley came to pick up Amber, The kindergarten teacher said Amber is an insufferable child. She doesn't get enough belt training. What did you say? With a belt? Are you out of your mind? You have a teacher's education. Ashley was outraged. How can you even mention the belt? I'm doing preventive counseling with my daughter at home. But you, too, should be helping me so that the girl adapts to her peers. Talk to the child and tell her that what she's doing is wrong. And if you and I do not find a common language, then I will have to appeal to your management. After this conversation between Ashley and the teacher, the complaints stopped, and after a while Amber was eager to go to kindergarten. Life slowly moved on. Ashley now dreamed of having a second child. She wanted to give her husband an heir. However, time passed, and the woman could not get pregnant. One evening, Ashley talked to her mother and said that she dreamed of having a second child. Mary sighed sadly after her daughter's words and sadly said, "I'll let you in on a secret. Basically, Amber is your only child, and there won't be any others." Why is that? It's because we're on our third generation of having only one child, and it's necessarily a girl. That was my grandmother's, then my mom's, and then mine. I wanted to have at least 3 too, but God gave me only you. It's an ancient prejudice. You could say it's a coincidence, though. Don't take hope away from me. I'm bound to have more. I'm sorry, daughter, I probably shouldn't have told you that. I don't want to take away your dream. I just thought you should know about it. The older woman sighed heavily and actually regretted her words. Time moved on imperceptibly, and it was about to be her 6th birthday when suddenly Mary felt sick. The woman was washing dishes in the kitchen when she felt a severe headache. The pensioner, writhing from the spasm, hurried to the kitchen cabinet, which stored medicines. However, the woman did not have time to get a pill, as she lost consciousness. Ashley discovered Mary when she returned from daycare with her daughter. The woman, seeing her mother lying on the floor, cried out desperately and rushed to her mom. Amber, hearing her mom scream, cried frightened. Meanwhile, Ashley tried to bring the pensioner to her senses, but she was unsuccessful, and then she called an ambulance. Soon Mary was hospitalized. Ashley waited for the hospital with visits. She wanted to know what was wrong with her mother. When the woman went to the doctor once again, the doctor quietly said the cancer is brain cancer. I can't say anything else, as I am not a specialist in this case. I have other specifics. You need to get to a specialized clinic as soon as possible. How so? Whispered the woman, who couldn't believe what the medical professional had just told her. That same evening, Ashley told her spouse about everything. The couple began to consider where they could find a decent amount of money to travel to the regional city. Ben suggested taking out a loan, but his wife didn't refuse. Soon Mary was taken to the regional city by her daughter. The elderly woman lay for a while in the hospital, and then Ashley came for her, who hoped that everything was not so terrible. However, the doctor's words shocked her. Stage 4. So what's wrong with that? It's not like it's a verdict. People live at this stage. You told me you're a medical professional. It's not for me to tell you what stage 4 is. Yes, people live at that stage, but the only question is how long they live. There's one thing I don't understand about your situation. How could you, a medical professional, allow your mother to have such a neglected disease? Mom rarely complained of headaches, and if she did say she had a headache, she added that it was the magnetic storms. They affect her that way, Ashley replied, hiding her face in her palms and crying desperately. The doctor put his arm around the visitor and said, I understand your condition, but you should pull yourself together now, as you need to go to your mom. And I don't think Mary will be happy when she sees her daughter crying. Wait, shouldn't we go to the Capitol? The man in the white coat looked sadly at the lady, then shrugged his shoulders. And then the doctor went to the table, where there was a decanter, and poured water into a glass. And only after a few moments the visitor uttered, "Hope dies last." It's a folk saying. If it makes you feel better, go to Washington. They have better equipment there. But I'm not sure they'll give you a cure that'll get your mom back on her feet in no time. If I were you, personally, I would spend the money not to buy expensive drugs that won't help, but to make my mom's last days happy. Knew what she wanted and would fight to fulfill mom's dream. And if mom asks to prolong her life, then how would you fulfill your mom's wish? Ashley asked in a low voice and looked at the doctor point blank. The man hummed uncertainly, and after a few seconds he said, "I'd buy regular vitamins at the drugstore and give them to my mom. But at the same time I would tell her that these vitamins prolong life. But you would not fulfill your mother's wishes, but only make an appearance. Sometimes the appearance is life-extending." Soon the lady picked up her mother from the hospital and came home with her. The woman told her husband about the conversation with the doctor, as well as the desire to go to Washington, to which the spouse replied, "Don't you think the doctor was right when he said that the capital is unlikely to help anymore? You watch TV and see when celebrities are diagnosed with cancer, and public people spend fabulous money. And what's the result? Are you saying we should just give up and watch mom go quietly to the grave?" "I'm not saying that. Don't twist my words. I'm just trying to make the point that Mary should be at home, not in a hospital room. I don't know how much longer my mother-in-law has left to live, but I'd like her to feel peaceful and uncomfortable." "All right, so be it." Mary lived only 2 months after her hospitalization. It happened early one morning when the sun was just coming out. The daughter, who had been sleeping with her mother lately, found out that the person she loved was no longer in the world. At first, Ashley felt guilty for not realizing in time when her mother complained of headaches. Ben tried to reason with his wife to stop tormenting herself. However, after such support, the woman went into a screaming fit. And when once again Ashley blamed herself for not looking after her mother, the head of the family said, "You're getting paranoid. Stop being hysterical and let it go. Don't you realize you're becoming toxic? It's all because of your speculation. You're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting me and my daughter. You don't understand anything. I'm a medical professional, and I should have responded to Mom's complaints. And I didn't. And as a result, Mom is no longer alive. It's my fault she passed away so early. Oh, honey, you're really getting on my nerves. Why don't you stop beating yourself up? I think you should take a vacation with your daughter right before Amber starts first grade. Get some rest and relaxation. I'd go with you, but I don't have vacation until October. What do you think of my offer?" asked the husband and hugged his wife, who was still sobbing. The woman only nodded in response. She no longer had the strength to argue with her husband. Soon Ashley and her daughter left on a trip to the Gulf Coast. The woman was glad that Ben had insisted on the trip. Ashley spent a week at the sea with her daughter, and now it was the last day. Before leaving, Amber asked her mom to go to the beach one last time to admire the sea. Ashley did not refuse the child, and soon mother and daughter were already walking barefoot on the soft golden sand. Every now and then the girl ran to the water to touch the water with her toe. Ashley was watching her daughter when someone called her name. The woman looked back in bewilderment and saw her ex-husband Jason walking toward her. Ashley stared at him in amazement. Jason approached the woman and said hello in a friendly manner before mouthing, "Taking a vacation. I heard from my sister that you have a daughter. Congratulations, you've been dreaming of having kids." "Thank you. So many years have not seen each other, although we live in the same city. But we met at the sea. Listen, let's go sit in a cafe and talk. You and I have a lot to remember. You haven't changed a bit since the baby was born. You're just as petite as before. I'd love to reminisce with you about our pranks in bed. Thank you for the invitation, but I must refuse you. My daughter and I are leaving today, and you'd be better off with your wife, because I have a man I love, and I'm not attracted to the side, unlike you," Ashley replied softly, disgusted by her ex-husband's tone about intimacy. Meanwhile, Jason frowned and said wistfully, "We're not making love to my wife right now. She's 2 months away from giving birth, and she's blown to smithereens. I told my husband to terminate the pregnancy. After all, there are already 2 children, and she said that she will give birth to a 3rd. So it's wonderful that you have so many children. Children are happiness. But I just don't understand why you walk on the beach without your soulmate and children. My wife's at home, and I'm here on business, like on a business trip. My father-in-law is a businessman, so he sent me down here for a couple days. Well, good luck with your business. We should get going with our daughter," Ashley said quietly and beckoned her daughter over to her. The woman took the girl's hand and they headed towards the exit of the beach. Ashley walked at that moment and thought how lucky Jason's wife was to already have 2 children and to be carrying a baby under her heart at this time. Soon Ashley and her daughter arrived home. They were gushing over Ben about what a wonderful time they had. Amber took a handful of sand out of her backpack to make her daddy happy. Ashley laughed when she saw it. Her husband looked at his wife in bewilderment, but she was even more amused when she saw Ben's amazed face. When the first emotions from the sand had passed, Ashley explained the reason for her laughter. She told her husband that she had hidden something in her backpack the night before she left. Ashley hadn't thought much of it at the time, but as she put her daughter's backpack on her shoulders, she wondered why it was so heavy. Ben, still not realizing anything, looked into his daughter's backpack and immediately chuckled, and through a fit of laughter turned to his daughter. "You wanted so much to please Daddy that you stuffed the whole backpack with sand. That's a good girl to please your father. So you were sunbathing in the sun like me and Mom. And now you can fill a trough with water, pour sand on the ground next to it. And it's like you're having a vacation at the sea. It's great, isn't it? You're so good at it." "That's a wonderful idea. And Jackson Sunshine, Daddy will give you a kiss for being clever." Life moved on, and soon it was time to go to first grade. On the eve of that event, Ashley put her daughter to bed and headed into the hall to iron her white apron. She spread the bedspread on the board, and then laid the apron down thoughtfully and spoke softly. "How quickly time runs. You too. Our daughter is going to first grade tomorrow. As my mother used to tell me, it's worth it for a child to go to school, then time will fly by after that imperceptibly." "Is that you talking to yourself?" pronounced Ben, who had just entered the room and heard his spouse's phrase. "I'm saying that you and I are getting a little old now. And you know, my mom was right when she said that all women in our line give birth to only one child. And it's always a girl. Oh, that's so lucky. You and me were in the prime of our lives. And as for the one-child thing, that's just prejudice. That's what I told my mother. But you see, I can't get pregnant again." "That's all right. We still have a whole cartload of time. Drop what you're doing and let's go into the bedroom to make a baby," Ben said, and winked excitedly at his spouse. Ashley smiled and said, "I was having a serious conversation with you." "And you're at it again?" "I'm being quite serious, too. And about the kids, I can only say this: we have a daughter. And we should be happy about it. We need to get Amber on her feet so she can go to school and get a good life in the future." And so Amber has already started first grade. Her mother and father alternately took her daughter to and picked her up from school. The girl studied willingly, and soon parents often heard praise from the class teacher. Ashley and her husband were only happy. The first half of the year flew by. Amber became friends with a classmate. The girl's name was Christina. Friends spent a lot of time together. The parents of the girls were only happy about this friendship, which did not affect the performance at school. And now it was spring. The time of summer vacation was approaching. Amber came home alone. She had already been released to school alone after the winter. The girl came home and went to her room without greeting her mother, who was busy in the kitchen. Ashley was curious as to why her daughter had done that. The woman wiped her hands on a towel and proceeded to the nursery, where she saw her upset daughter. The homeowner approached the girl and asked what had happened. Amber glanced glumly at her mom and immediately, almost tearfully, said, "Christina, her parents bought her rollerblades, as well as a helmet, elbow pads, and knee pads. I want to go rollerblading in the summer too." "And what are you getting upset about? Daddy will come over and talk to him about it." "It's all words. Dad already promised me a bicycle." "And what? He bought a junk bike. It's a shame to even ride it in the yard. Dad bought me the bike I pointed out in the store, and then suddenly I needed another one. He said, ride this one first, and then you can get another bike. I don't need a bike now. I want rollerblades." In the evening, Ben came home from work, as his daughter immediately ran up to him and asked him to buy rollers. The head of the family, after a little thought, promised his daughter to make the purchase. Ashley heard the answer. The spouse did not interfere in the conversation between father and daughter. However, when Amber went to bed, Ashley emphatically stated that she was against the purchase. Ben looked at his wife in amazement and asked, "Why do you disapprove of rollerblading?" "She's too young for the sport. Amber is a girl, not a boy. It's more appropriate for her to play with her dolls, not run around on those rollerblades like tomboys everywhere. Wait, honey, you know what kids are like these days. Girls only play dolls in kindergarten, and once they go to school, their priorities change. And anyway, how can you imagine our daughter's friend rollerblading and Amber looking at her with envy? It's a very interesting picture. And if Christina bought a live tiger tomorrow, would you run out and buy that animal for your daughter too? Why make it so complicated? Okay, if you promised your daughter, then buy the rollers. But I warn you right away that you will walk with Zlata when she starts to learn to ride them. Whatever you say, my queen. Ashley ahed when she heard the sum. However, the woman glanced at her daughter, who was looking at the roller skates with wild delight. Afterward, Ashley smiled at her spouse and said, "Look at how happy our daughter is about these rollerblades. As they say, what's a little something for a child to be happy about? Okay, go outside and try out the accessories and then tell us about the progress." Time went on its own. At first, Ben accompanied his daughter and her friend on outings after work. And then, when Amber became more confident on rollers, the family decided that the girl would ride only in the park and never on the roadway. Amber happily agreed to this proposal, as she was already tired of her dad accompanying her. And Christina's father does not do it. June and then July flew by. Ashley was coming home from her shift. She rode on the shuttle bus and smiled as she recalled her day at work. Soon the driver announced a stop. The woman got out of the vehicle and headed to the nearest store to buy milk and eggs. Ashley was going to make an omelet for dinner. The woman had already approached the store when she heard her spouse calling her. Ashley turned around and asked what he was doing here. Ben smiled and pronounced, "I wanted to meet you from work, but I guess I didn't time it right." "There's something you're not telling me, honey. Spill what happened," the woman mumbled worriedly. Ben, seeing his wife's reaction, laughed and immediately said, "It's actually our boss's anniversary. He let everyone go home early, but I wasted my time and cooked dinner at home myself. And then I saw that there was no bread at home and hurried to the store, where I saw you. And I thought something had happened to my daughter," Ashley said, relieved. Then she smiled and said, "Let your boss have a holiday every day then. I'll be spared the cooking then." Imagine how happy that would be for a woman. By the way, I forgot to ask, what did you cook? "Flotsam pasta is my specialty. You know very well that cooking is not my business. That's what I have you for. Now you tell me how your day at work went." Ashley looked lovingly at her husband. Then she told him that she'd had a hard day at work. He asked why it had been tiring at work. Ashley smiled and said, "Although it's a hard day, it's a joyful one. A woman gave birth to triplets today. Imagine. She's 38 years old and this is her first labor. You should have seen this woman in labor when she was given her first baby in her arms. That woman's eyes were full of happiness. That's the first time I've seen eyes like that in so many years. And the funniest thing is that when she was transferred from the labor room to the ward, she began to wonder how she would feed 3 babies because she had only 2 breasts. Our medical staff, everyone who was in the ward, just fell down laughing. They found something to laugh about. If I were a woman, I might be interested in that question too. Although, I admire our woman in labor because she gave birth at 38. And you've given up on the whole thing. We should do the same thing tonight, as soon as we put our daughter to bed. And maybe don't even hint to me that you had a hard day's work or a headache. You won't get away from me today," he said with a smile. "Let's go home then. Can't wait to taste your specialty," said the wife with a laugh and took her husband under her elbow. And so it was already the end of August. School was a few days away. Amber walked up to her mom and asked to go for a walk. Ashley had the day off today. She glanced out the window and then turned to her daughter. "It's okay to walk, but just no rollerblades." Amber frowned and immediately inquired, "Why no rollerblades?" "The weather's turning bad. It's supposed to rain. Maybe you and Christina can sit with us today and play on the laptop," Mom replied. So much for Mom's idea. There were only a few days left until school started, and then there would definitely be no time to go for a ride. "Mom, let me go. Christina and I will skate carefully, as always." "Mom, you're the best in the world. My favorite. You know I can't refuse you when you ask me to. Go on, take a walk," said the woman and kissed her daughter on the top of her head. As soon as the girl jumped out of the door, the woman felt a vague uneasiness in her soul. Ashley was about to run out after her daughter and call her home when her cell phone rang. The woman was distracted by the phone call and then went out into the yard. But her daughter was not there, of course. It had been about 2 hours since Amber had gone for a walk. Ashley still felt a heaviness in her soul. The woman dialed her daughter and asked how they were doing. Amber cheerfully replied that everything was fine and immediately disconnected the connection. Hearing her daughter's voice made Ashley feel a little calmer. Another hour passed before Amber left for her walk. Ashley started the laundry. She pulled out her daughter's terrycloth robe as there was a loud knock on the door. At the same time, the woman heard Christina crying. Ashley hurried to the door, and as soon as she opened it, she saw Christina's crying face. The landlady asked anxiously, "What happened?" "Amber was hit by a car," she said through her sobs. "I came straight to you." "What do you mean, hit by a car? What are you talking about? Where's Amber?" "They took her away in an ambulance," Christina said through sobs. Ashley sucked in air with her mouth and then asked the girl where it had happened. When she found out where the hit and run had happened, the woman rushed to the scene of the tragedy without changing her slippers. When she got there, she saw a small crowd of gawkers, as well as a cordon of the place on the stretch of road. The woman, pushing people, rushed to the place. As soon as she got there, she saw the chalked silhouette of a child on the pavement, as well as brown bloodstains. Not far away, Ashley spotted a helmet. The helmet belonged to her daughter, and at the same moment the woman lost consciousness. Ashley woke up in the hospital. Sitting next to her was her husband Ben, who was holding her hand. As soon as Ben saw that his wife came to her senses, he immediately jumped up and ran out into the hallway, where he loudly called a nurse. A girl in a white coat hurried into the room. She approached Ashley and asked how the woman was feeling. Ashley waved her hand and wanted to get up. Her husband wouldn't let her. Then the woman asked her spouse, "What about your daughter?" "She's alive. Amber's in the ICU. The doctors are fighting for her life. Help me up. I need to be near my daughter. My presence will help her." "You just had a heart attack, and you can't get up," Ben said quietly but firmly. He wanted to add something else, but at that moment the doctor entered the room and came up to Ashley and said, "Are you awake? That's great. You're going to be given an injection, and then try to sleep. I'm not going to be here. Let's get you the papers you need to sign to refuse hospitalization." "Ashley, do I really need to tell you as a medical professional what the consequences of refusing medical care are?" The man in the white coat said sternly. "That's exactly what I know. That is why you should not waste your precious time now and explain to me the plain truths which I already know without you." The doctor looked at Ben after the woman's words, but he only waved his hands, thus making it clear that he could not influence his spouse in this situation. And after a while, Ashley was near the entrance to the intensive care unit. She prayed to God that her daughter would survive. Ben at this time stood near the window and looked at the sill with a hateful look. Some time passed. Ashley walked over to her husband and quietly touched his elbow. The husband immediately flinched at the touch and turned to his wife. He put his arm around Ashley and then pressed the woman's head against his chest and immediately felt her crying. Ben asked her to calm down, but the woman didn't respond to her husband's words. Ben became nervous. He was worried that his wife might have a second stroke. The man wanted to run after the nurse as he was stopped by his spouse, who faintly said, "Tell me what happened." "I can't tell you much." Anyway, the girls were already rollerblading home. They needed to pass the zebra. As here Christina had a slip on her lap, she bent down to correct it, and her daughter at the same time moved across the road, and then a foreign car flew out. Amber didn't have time to react and a hit and run occurred. Christina was saved from the collision by her knee pads. Witnesses called an ambulance and police officers. The investigator told me the driver fled the scene. But he's already been arrested. He was under the influence of alcohol when he hit our daughter. Ben was silent, looked at his wife, who only clenched her hands in a fist. The woman's face had gone pale. Ashley didn't say anything, she just stood there staring at one point. The man did not know how to behave in this situation, so once again pressed his wife to him and gently said, "Everything will work out, and our daughter will still recover." "I want that bastard to get the maximum punishment," Ashley told him. "That criminal will get what he deserves. Right now, I think you should go home so you can recover." "No home, our little girl needs us here." "Okay, sweetheart." It was another couple hours before 2 doctors came out of the ICU. Ashley rushed over to them and grabbed one doctor by the chest. The man in the white coat tried to pull his hands off the woman, but he was unsuccessful. And then the second doctor turned to the lady's husband. "We did everything we could here, but the girl suffered many injuries. We couldn't save her." Ashley, as soon as she heard this, pushed the doctor away, then sobbed loudly. She then turned to her husband and started beating her fists on his chest, shouting, "It's your fault. It's your fault. I was against these videos. How am I supposed to live without my little girl?" One of the doctors quickly realized that the woman was hysterical. The man in the white coat shouted something to the nurse, who came out to the noise. The lady was given an injection and soon she fell asleep. Ben was next to his wife the whole time. And as soon as the spouse woke up, she asked to take her home. The man complied with the request without any objection. Amber's funeral soon followed. All this time Ashley was in prostration. She did not understand why so many people had come to the cemetery, and also did not realize why those present were expressing their condolences to her. It wasn't until the coffin was being lowered into the hole that Ashley realized it was her baby girl being buried. The woman shrieked, ran to the coffin, wrapped both arms around it, and screamed, "Don't. I can't let my daughter go to her final resting place alone. I want to lie next to her." From the coffin, Ashley was able to tear Ben together with her father, who came to the funeral of his granddaughter. The woman was then picked up by neighbors and hurriedly taken away from the cemetery. At home, Ashley could not sit down at the table to memorialize her daughter as she became ill with heart trouble. Her spouse called an ambulance and the woman was hospitalized. Several days passed after the funeral. Ben visited his spouse daily, although it was a long drive. "We still don't know when the trial will be. Be patient, my dear, let's get better at my place," he told her. "Why should I get better if our daughter is no longer in this world?" Ashley replied. "I realize that we lost our only child, but don't forget that I need you, that I love you, and I can't lose you. And Amber wouldn't want that either." Some time passed. Ashley was released from the hospital and went to work. The days seemed like torture for the woman. Ashley hated the nights most of all, as sleep was non-existent. She had fleeting visions of her daughter coming to her and asking her to punish the man who hit her. Ben saw that his wife could not find peace until she knew what punishment the driver would receive, and soon the trial took place. As it turned out, that driver was some local oligarch. The defendant got off with a fine. It was twisted to mean that Amber was crossing the road in the wrong place. Amber's testimony disappeared from the case, and a whole new set of witnesses came forward. When Ashley found out about it, she went door to door with the D.A.'s office, the police, the DMV. But everywhere she was pointed at the door. The woman was desperate, and after another visit to the investigator, she came home and drank a few shots of whitewater. Ashley literally immediately became tipsy, as strong drinks were not spoiled. When her husband came home from work, her wife said to him in an inebriated voice, "How can you live peacefully in this world when our daughter is gone because of your fault? First of all, you, my dove, are drunk. Let's talk about it tomorrow when you're sober. I want to tell you everything now. You're not really a man. The man who ruined my daughter is out there, and you didn't even lift a finger to avenge him. What can I do when money rules the world now? Don't you understand that? What do you think I should do? Go to that oligarch and throw him from the 5th floor. Would that make you feel better? Only I'd have to go to jail for it, because I don't have the money to pay him off. I'd go and throw him from the 5th floor. Maybe then my daughter would stop coming to me at night." Ben did not say anything to his wife, only took the bottle of hot drink from her hands. And afterward, the man retired to the nursery to ponder how to help his wife overcome the loss of her only daughter. Sasha did not sleep all night, and the only thing that came to his mind was to take his wife to the bishop in the church, which he soon did. After the church visit, the lady was now less often visited by her daughter in dreams. Time moved on imperceptibly, and now a year has passed since Amber was buried. During this time, the lady had hardened a bit. Whereas she used to come to work in high spirits, now she disliked women in labor. The woman did not tell anyone about it, but the team has already noticed that Ashley often rudely treats future moms. The chief Dr. Jackson Michael repeatedly made his subordinate remarks on this matter. The woman promised to correct herself, but everything was repeated again. And once Ashley, together with the doctor, delivered a woman in labor. The young woman was in labor for the first time. And when the contractions began, she screamed that she was in pain. Ashley considered the future mommy hysterical, and the words of the doctor made remarks to her, and after the birth wrote a report to the chief doctor. Jackson Michael familiarized himself with the document and called Ashley to his office. As soon as the woman entered, the master of the office seriously said, "This can't go on any longer. If before, everyone wanted you to assist in childbirth, but now women in labor, just hearing your name, frightened. Maybe you should go to the sea with your husband, get away for a while. I understand your grief that you lost a child, but our patients are not to blame. Let's find some common ground, otherwise we'll go our separate ways, even though you're an excellent midwife. Now, I want an answer from you. I'm going to reconsider how I treat my patients. I'm sorry, it won't happen again." I've heard that before. Ashley, why don't you give me one last chance? Okay? You might want to think about taking a vacation. A change of scenery for a while is good for a person, especially in your situation. Ashley came home in a gloomy mood. She went into the kitchen to make dinner, but immediately changed her mind and went into the living room, where she turned on the TV. The woman didn't watch the program at all. She was thinking about how to continue going to work. Ashley was distracted from her thoughts by her husband, who sat down next to her and said affectionately, "How was your workday? A lot of women gave birth today? Why are you interested? Honey, what's the matter with you? Actually, I've always been interested in that. Then from now on, stop doing it. How I'm sick of everything. How I'm sick of everything," said the wife nervously. Ben frowned after his wife's words and then said firmly, "Tell me what happened at work." Ashley didn't talk herself into it twice, but honestly recounted the conversation with the head doctor. Ben was silent for a long time after his wife's narration, and then asked why she had developed a dislike for laboring women. Ashley thought for a moment, and then, looking her husband in the eye, confessed, "You know, I look at their happy faces when they're presented with a baby, and it's like I get an electric shock inside, and it's because they're moms, and I'm never going to get to experience that. It's moments like that when it's like I'm possessed. I can't help it. In that case, should you quit this job? You can't force yourself to do something you don't want to do. I get the impression that you've grown to hate being a midwife and find no outlet in this job." "What do you mean quit? Do you want me to sit in four walls and slowly go insane?" "I'm not suggesting you sit at home. You could get a job as a clerk in a small store. I think you'll be able to balance your debit and credit. Or maybe we should really go on vacation somewhere in the country, take a tent, fishing rods, and spend a week in solitude, and then think about changing jobs." "Okay, let's do that, honey." Soon the couple went on vacation to Ben's father's house in the country. The couple had a great time. They often went to nature, where they fished in the lake, and then together they picked berries. Ashley then confessed to her husband that it was a pity that they did not go on vacation when Amber was alive. The husband did not answer anything to his wife, as he realized that if he said a word, his wife would start crying. A week later, the couple went back. Ben, upon arrival, asked his wife if she could go out to work in the maternity ward. Ashley replied in agreement. The woman actually believed the trip had changed her internally, and soon Ashley was on shift. The first day was fine, but after a week the same feeling of resentment returned to her. Ashley tried to fight her envy. She even pinched her arm to keep from being rude. It had been about a month since the vacation. Ashley arrived at work and mentally wished to herself that there were as few women as possible wanting to be moms today. Ashley had no idea what a difficult shift she was about to have. And it had all started when Taylor Grievna, the doctor on duty, had her daughter's fever. The young woman asked, "Check to see if you can handle it on your own today, especially with 4 hours left in the shift. Just understand I am divorced from my husband, and there is no one to look after my daughter, and I'm worried about her. She's got a fever of 38.8. She called me the other day." Taylor Grievna, go with peace of mind. I've never delivered a baby on my own, have I? And there's someone to help you if you need it. The head doctor's on call today. By the way, did you ask him to leave? Otherwise he'll ask me and I won't answer, and I'll get in trouble. Yeah, I talked to him. He's a man of the world and he recognized my situation right away. He also said that if Ashley was working, there was nothing to worry about. That head doctor of ours is flattering me. All right, go ahead, Taylor Grievna. You'll be running an even higher fever by the time you get home to your daughter. Just as Ashley escorted the woman out, a nurse announced that there were 2 women in labor. Ashley sighed to herself and hurried into the exam room. There was one middle-aged woman in there who had been brought in by ambulance. Ashley began to ask the patient questions in a businesslike manner. Just then, the head doctor entered the room and addressed the midwife. "This is going to be fun today. You're taking care of this woman, and I'm about to have a difficult labor." Ashley sighed sorrowfully and hurried to examine the woman. As soon as she saw the patient's chart, she immediately shuddered in displeasure. The woman in labor, Rachel Lionel, was 58 years old. After all the necessary procedures, the woman in labor was taken to the labor room. Ashley was clearly giving commands as to how the patient should proceed. Rachel Lionel responded by moaning and begging for the baby to be saved. Ashley was angry with the woman, unable to suppress her anger. And when the woman in labor moaned again, the midwife said angrily, "You're crazy. How could you think of giving birth at the age of 58? Now keep quiet and do as you're told." The labor was difficult. Ashley was completely exhausted. She would have been happy to have the help of the chief of medicine. But Jackson Michael was delivering triplets, and he was having a hard time with it too. And when the workday was over, Ashley breathed a sigh of relief. Now the only thing she wanted to do was come home, take a bath, and go to bed. This day she even changed her principles. She called a cab to get to her place of residence. Previously, she had not allowed herself such expenses. Soon the woman was already at home, where she was met by her husband Ben. He offered his wife to eat, but she waved away and said that she did not want anything, as the day was stressful. Afterward, Ashley said she delivered a baby for an elderly woman. Her husband whistled in surprise and said in amazement, "I can't believe what kind of women we have here." The next day at lunchtime, Ashley received a call from the chief physician, who ordered her to report to work. The woman was often called by her superiors, so she involuntarily had a thought, and whether this call is not connected with yesterday's elderly woman in labor. There was no time to ponder, however, and Ashley drove to the hospital. As soon as she got to the second floor, where the chief physician's office was, a nurse ran up to her and whispered, "Ours is out of control, vomiting and swearing." "What's the reason? You know, he said something about the woman in labor yesterday." The girl in the white coat wanted to add something, but then the door opened and the head doctor appeared and said, "I was just waiting for you, Ashley. Come on, let's go have a talk." The first to enter the office was the chief physician, who stood by the desk, tapping his fingers nervously on it. Ashley came in after the man, and she knew from the doctor's demeanor that he was going to get a scolding, since he was rarely this angry. As the woman closed the door, Jackson Michael came right up to her and said sternly, "What are you doing? I am well aware that today both you and I have a day off after yesterday's duty, but I get a call from a doctor saying that a woman in labor wants to get to know me. I wouldn't have responded to this request if I hadn't been told who this woman was. Do you happen to have any idea who this woman might be?" "I do," Ashley replied. "Rachel Lionel Kopylova gave birth to a baby girl." "That's right. When I went to see her, she was curious about the midwife who delivered her baby. Naturally, I asked what was wrong. Rachel wouldn't tell me what the situation was, but it was clear she wasn't happy about what you'd done. And now I'll tell you for your understanding that this woman in labor is the wife of a very famous man in the regional city. And if now we are tortured with checks, the stumbling block will be you, because your tongue says nasty things. I'd like to add that if I fire you, your husband will get it too, and so will I for that matter." "Wait a minute," Ashley said. "If this lady is the wife of a respectable man, why did she come here to give birth? Why didn't she give birth in her own town?" "You're asking me these questions?" The head doctor was indignant. "You don't understand the seriousness of the situation. I'm not interested in why Rachel ended up in our hospital." Ashley was more concerned with the aftermath of her shift. She wasn't going to rant about it. You go on your knees and beg for forgiveness, birthing girl. Basically do whatever it takes to earn her favor. The doctor gestured toward the door, letting her know that the conversation was over. Ashley walked out of the office. Her face was burning. The woman didn't know how to start a conversation with the woman in labor, whom she had insulted. Nevertheless, Ashley pulled herself together and headed toward the room. She knocked on the door and then entered. Immediately, her attention was caught by the way Rachel Lionel was admiring her newborn daughter. Ashley hesitated, letting her know she was in the room. She turned at the sound and looked at the midwife intently. "I want to apologize to you," Ashley spoke first. "I behaved inappropriately with you yesterday. I'll get down on my knees if you want me to. But please forgive me. I didn't know whose wife you were." "Don't clean it. Are you saying that if I were the wife of a locksmith or a janitor, you wouldn't feel guilty about talking to a woman in labor like that?" Rachel Lionel said sternly and looked reproachfully at the midwife. Ashley at that moment was ready to fall to the ground in shame, because she realized that she had said something stupid. But she answered nonetheless. "I wouldn't feel guilty." "Well, thank you for your honest answer. If you lied now, I'd lose the last shred of respect for you. Now tell me, why are you so rude to women in labor? Don't deny it, since I've been doing a little checking up on you around here." Ashley looked at Rachel with a sad look, and then tears ran down her cheeks. The midwife, without knowing why, told this woman how she had lost her baby, that the perpetrator had gotten off scot-free after the hit and run, and told her that she dreamed of becoming a mom, but it wasn't happening. Therefore, when women of advanced age give birth, she is filled with anger and envy. Rachel listened attentively to the interlocutor. Then she smiled sadly. She invited the midwife to sit down next to her, then took her hand and asked her to stop crying. Ashley wiped her tears away with the palm of her hand. While smearing mascara on her face, Rachel immediately held out a damp washcloth with the words, "Are you now, like a lost sheep, aware of our fate? Related. At one time, I couldn't get pregnant for a long time either. And when it did happen, it was a miracle for me and my husband. My husband at that time was still a small official in the administration. And then my son grew up and against parental will, after serving in the army, went to the hot spot. My husband and I hoped that the trouble would pass us by. However, the miracle did not happen. Our boy died. We could not recover from this tragedy for a long time. But as they say, time heals. My husband moved up the career ladder, and that's when I had the idea that I could still have a child. I was examined in many clinics, but the doctors were throwing up their hands. And then came the decision to do IVF. My husband and I consulted. He is 7 years younger than me, and we came to a mutual agreement that we could take a risk. And the risk justified our expectations. We have a daughter. The main thing is that our health should be good." Ashley sat in silence after Rachel's story. The woman's story had touched something in her soul. Meanwhile, Jackson Michael paced nervously around the office, wondering if Ashley had made amends, and unable to bear it, the man strode into the room, where he saw a peaceful conversation between the women, who smiled at each other. The chief physician came out in bewilderment. The only thing he realized was that the conflict was over. Meanwhile, Ashley smiled embarrassedly and asked the question she had been wondering about the late pregnancy. "It's understandable. I'm happy for you, but I just don't understand why you came to give birth in a provincial town." "I didn't really want to come here," Rachel answered Lionel. But immediately, becoming serious, she continued. "My husband went on a business trip to New York. I was against this trip, but my husband is still an enthusiast, likes to be in the know. My spouse was away for 2 days and should have been back by now. Then I got the call that he had a heart attack. I could not stay at home and drove myself by car to that city. However, the nervousness had taken its toll. I felt the baby wanted to be born. So your town came up. And in the morning my husband called and said that he is doing well and he will be here soon. I had to scold him and scare him that if he leaves the hospital without permission, our daughter will be taken away from the hospital. My blackmail succeeded. What a brave woman you are. Ashley said with admiration. I'm not brave. I just love my husband as much as he loves me. And yet I envy you, but with white envy. I mean, you realized your dream and became a mom. Can you do it too? You're a midwife and you know what IVF is. I do, but I'm afraid my husband wouldn't like it, Ashley said quietly. And that's where you're wrong. From your story, your husband loves you and would do anything to make you happy. My advice is to go for it. Just don't hurt any more women in labor. I give you my word it won't happen again. Meeting you and your story changed something in my soul. And you know I'm very happy about it. Too much. Andrew was in a lot of pain. Emily's pain faded into the background. She was scared out of her mind. 3 weeks passed, but Andrew still couldn't recover. He couldn't eat. He felt like he was the reason William had left the family. Andrew, it's not your fault his mother tried to convince him. It's just that your father betrayed you and me. Then I didn't listen to him. I went to play with those boys, the son cried. They were smoking. Dad found out and thought I smoked with him. He didn't forgive me. He didn't love me after that. Emily clutched her head. Andrew felt so much guilt that there seemed to be no way out of it. A month passed and Emily decided to file for divorce after all. She had gained some moral strength. William knew about it right away. He got in his car, headed for his mother-in-law and father-in-law's house. He didn't know what to do next. On the one hand, he loved Emily and his son. The latter was very dear to him, but everything in their lives had become monotonous. He wanted new impressions. He began to feel that he was getting old. Perhaps that's what drove him to adventure. Irene Alexis, Gregory Myron, his son-in-law, lowered his head. I ask you to speak to me. The father-in-law looked at him angrily. He would have loved to punch him in the face. But Irene Alexis was a mother herself. She was worried about both Emily and Andrew. Billy, she sighed. Do you realize the pain you've caused them? But what were you missing? I don't know, he shrugged. I want to apologize to Emily. I love her. I want to go back to them. I seriously doubt she'll take you back. My mother-in-law said with annoyance in her voice. But what were you thinking? You've got a mistress under your nose. But you will come back. And how will you live? Emily will see the tank all the time. We'll leave here. Suddenly declared son-in-law. There won't be any tank there. Where to? My father-in-law entered the conversation. Do you think the rumor about you will not reach there? He scolded. Anyway, Emily's parents promised to talk to her. Naturally, she didn't want to hear about her husband's return. Mom, don't tell me anything about him, she said angrily. I hate him. I'll divorce him. Emily, listen to me. Irene Alexis tried to look at the problem from every angle. I don't care what you decide. But I'm asking you to think about Andrew. The child is suffering. And it was true. Emily burst into tears. Her heart couldn't bear the sadness of her son. He thought of his father all the time, and the fact that William hadn't shown up all this time made it worse. And then the day came when Andrew didn't come home from school. When Emily was on duty, his grandfather would pick him up. But the woman's father reported that Andrew didn't show up today. Emily called in a substitute to cover her shift. Of course, there was nothing the police could do. So they searched for Andrew on their own. Billy, Irene said excitedly to Alexis, Andrew's missing. Has he come to see you? No, he said worriedly. I'll be right over, he promised and got into the car. As much as Emily felt bad, she didn't say anything. Everyone started looking for Andrew. They found him at one of the playgrounds. Oh, my son. His mother rushed over to him. Demochka. She started kissing the child. Daddy. When he saw William, he rushed to him. Daddy, cried the boy. You could say that that incident had determined everything. As much as Emily didn't want to, she made the choice to reconcile with William because of her son. Everyone sat at Emily's parents' house, and had a serious conversation. "We're going to move to another town," the son-in-law said at once. Andrew didn't take a step away from him. Emily agreed. She realized that no matter how womanizer was her husband, he sincerely loved his son. Perhaps that was why William had just taken a mistress. Emily had no intention of leaving her family, but that didn't make her feel any better. Cheating was still cheating, no matter how you looked at it. 2 months later, they sold the house, and Emily and her family moved to a neighboring town, which was 70 kilometers away. They bought a small house, as it was a more promising place, and accordingly, life was more expensive. Emily got a job as a post nurse in one of the hospitals. William found a crew and started doing repairs with them. Such services were in great demand. Andrew recovered quickly, enjoyed going to his new school, and made friends very quickly. Emily's life, despite the fact that she was doing the same things as before, seemed to take a new direction. "Why don't we have a baby?" her husband once said to her. "A child would bring us joy." "I'm not ready yet," she sighed. "I've been traveling a lot in the last year, but you're already 38. Where else can I put it off?" He objected. "And I'm not getting any younger either. I'm already 42. You can't say Emily got married late. She was 25. It's just that her job was stressful, so you can't get pregnant right away. "Let's revisit this conversation in 6 months," the wife asked. Still, Emily had her doubts. She kept thinking that the day would come when William would cheat on her again. "There won't be any more cheating," she assured herself. "We're fine. Why should our past determine our future?" But no matter how much she set herself up for the best, her intuition told her that something was bound to happen in her life. Maybe that was the real reason Emily didn't want a second child. It was May. Emily and her family had already been living in the new place for 8 months. Everyone had gotten used to it and had no idea how they had lived in their hometown a year ago. Andrew had grown up. He had already turned 11. The boys in the new school were more advanced. The boy had somehow grown up quickly. He was very seriously interested in modeling. He and 2 of his friends went to a children's club where they built various ships in scale. "Very beautiful," praised Andrew's mother. "Son, how do you have the patience?" She laughed. "I would not be able to sit for hours and collect it all by crumbs." "You know, how interesting," Andrew said proudly. "We're going to exhibit in a competition." It wasn't that Andrew had grown cold to his father, but it was noticeable that he was now more interested in his friends than in his father. They still talked occasionally, especially when it came to their son's hobbies. But Emily could see that they had not become friends, and William was very tired. Sometimes there were urgent works, so that he could not even spend the night at home. And so Emily's life flowed in a new direction, and a few words about her work. In principle, the team was nothing. Emily immediately made a friend from the children's ward. The only one. The head therapist was a cold man. He even seemed stiff from the outside. And since Emily worked in his department, she still didn't understand how to communicate with him. Gregory Myron didn't seem to notice anyone. He was strict, but acted so professionally that without any doubt he could be called not only the best doctor of the hospital, but also of the whole region. Many, very many people bowed down to his talent, not that he admitted it. He paid no attention at all to rumors or anyone in his direction. He was constantly focused on his work. From the outside, it seemed that he could solve any task. There were enough instances where he alone was able to determine the true cause of an illness, and a man who was almost dying was discharged a month later. Gregory Myron didn't look like his usual self either. His hair was almost gray, but his face looked quite young. About 6 months later, Emily learned that he was only 47. It was Emily's shift when the doctor approached her. He looked concerned. "Emily," he said, "I need to pick you up for about an hour. I'll get Annie to keep an eye on the post. We're going to see a patient in 20 minutes. Be ready." Emily nodded. She rushed to Annie's procedure nurse. She informed her that the doctor had already spoken to her. "Annie, do you know what happened in there?" Emily asked. "He said it was a bad case," Annie replied. "There's an old woman. She's been in and out of the hospital a few times. Apparently she's gotten worse again. She has a son who keeps asking to be treated at home. And there's no room right now. I think that's why he's coming himself. Exactly 20 minutes later, the doctor came to pick Emily up and they headed to the address. Isaac Alexander was focused and silent. Emily was sometimes even afraid of his presence. He seemed sensual. So they reached the patient without a word. The doctor got out and headed for the entrance. The nurse hurried after him. The woman moaned. Emily's heart clenched. Isaac Alexander examined her and hesitated for a few moments. "Emily, take blood, urine," he said coldly. "I'll take a sample of the vomit myself." Isaac Alexander told the woman's son that he would call him in 2 days, and they would decide what to do. The doctor and the nurse went downstairs and got into his car. Isaac Alexander often drove his vehicle out on work-related errands, and Emily had never heard him ask his superiors for compensation. "I think it's something autoimmune," the doctor whispered. Emily flinched in surprise. "I think it's something masquerading as another disease," he continued. "How is that possible? Don't the tests tell us what the real cause is?" "You can do all the possible tests, ultrasounds and CT scans, and still not see the real cause," Isaac Alexander replied. "You see, we still don't know how the immune system works. We have only a superficial idea, like a small iceberg on the surface of the ocean, and a huge block hidden underwater. Too many factors affect this process. She has no serious diseases, no cancer. But she's falling apart before our eyes. What's happening to her? There's no answer. It's like something triggers and everything goes to hell. Then she goes into remission and everything's more or less fine." "What are you going to do with her?" Emily asked with interest. "Are you going to put her in the hospital?" "First we'll look at the tests," said Isaac Alexander. He stopped talking. They drove the rest of the way in silence, and Emily didn't ask any more questions. The workday continued, and she forgot about her morning commute. The night passed quietly, the May air putting her in a good mood. Emily lay on the couch and thought about her family. Maybe he's right, a thought popped into her head. Having a girl will strengthen our family. "Yeah, I'm getting sick of medicine." Emily felt herself tanning. For years she had been responsible in her work, but the fatigue was building up. She and William didn't have the opportunity to go anywhere on vacation. They were making a little more money, but living in the city meant more expenses. Andrew went to sports and a modeling class, which also required money. Will we be able to afford all this if we have a daughter, she wondered. Morning came. Emily cheered up. A couple more hours and she would be going home. She got up and went about her duties. The ward was quiet and she began filling out the many logs. It was almost 8 o'clock when Emily got ready to go home. Another nurse had come to take over her shift, and Emily told her what had happened in the meantime. There were 3 post-nurses on the ward who were constantly changing. One of them was a very quiet woman. Lila was in her 50s and she usually didn't get involved in anything. But Amber, who came in now, was noted for her talkativeness and tendency to gossip. Closely, Amber jumped up to her. "I have an anniversary in 3 days. You are required to attend. Do you understand me?" She burned a glare at her coworker. "Yeah, I'll be working anyway," Emily smiled. "What's your anniversary?" She was confused. "Well, of course it is. 40 years, Amber announced proudly. "There's even going to be a robot," that's what coworkers called Isaac Alexander among themselves. Can you imagine? When I told him that, say, "Let's eat cake, drink juice," he nodded to me in agreement. "I doubt he'll even eat the cake," Emily laughed. "I've never seen him at a meal. Here's coffee." Yeah, he's weird in general," Amber whispered in her ear. "I heard he couldn't save his wife, so he takes his anger out on everyone." What happened to her? Curiosity piqued Emily. "Didn't know he was married?" "Yeah, she had something serious going on there. He fought for her life. Took her to New York for a couple years. But nothing helped," Amber quickly echoed. "Although I can't imagine who would marry him at all." "Do you think he used to be this unsociable?" "Isaac Alexander is a good doctor," Emily sighed. "He's just unlucky. Well, as they say, keep it simple and people will reach out to you." The woman laughed. "Okay, until the anniversary." Emily didn't much like her coworker's attitude toward the doctor. He was a genius. They didn't realize that. He may not have been able to save his wife, but he had helped hundreds, or even thousands of people, after all. The woman also thought about the fact that she didn't want to be present at all these meetings at work. It was enough that she had a friend in the children's ward. The rest of the staff didn't really get her attention. Emily walked into the house. Andrew was already at school and her husband William was at work. Despite the sleepless night, she didn't feel like sleeping. She sipped some hot tea and her body relaxed. Emily lay down on the bed and fell asleep. Thus began a new day for her. After lunch, Emily was already doing chores around the house. Dinner was on the stove, she was cutting a salad, went out to get some greens in the vegetable garden, and stopped. The smells of May wafted through the air. Emily had always dreamed of spending a few days watching spring come. But it had never worked out. There were always things to do at home, so she couldn't afford to just sit idle. Emily closed her eyes. It made the smells even more vivid. A bird sang to her left. It felt good. "I want a daughter," she said out loud and laughed at her own thoughts. Her soul sang. In the evening, her husband William returned from work. Andrew had returned from modeling. His eyes were burning. He spent almost half an hour telling his mother about his new job. Emily looked at him and realized that her boy had grown up a lot. A couple more years and he would turn into a guy. "Mom, we're going to a competition at the sports school. Can you give me some money?" He remembered soccer. Sure, she patted him on the head. "Son, how much do you need? I'll call your coach." Emily realized that her secret dream of quitting her job was simply unrealistic. She had always wanted her children to have a better life than she or her parents had. Her father and mother had done everything they could for her. But if they'd had the money, Emily would have chosen a different profession. Not to say she liked medicine. She had dreamed of becoming an architect or a designer as a child, but as they say, it didn't work out. Late in the afternoon, William returned. He ate quickly and went straight to bed. Emily marveled again at how their relationship with her son had changed in just over a year. Andrew was no longer as attached to William, perhaps still to his mother. But Emily could see that just a little more and Andrew would begin to live a life of his own already. "How strange does it feel," she thought as she went to bed. "Somehow I was sure that my son would always be a little boy who would depend on us." How quickly had things changed. The rest of the days flew by quickly. It was getting close to the weekend, which meant Emily had to go to work again. God, she'd completely forgotten about Amber. Emily remembered tonight. She needed to buy a gift. Nothing came to mind, and it was too late. Emily decided to give her coworker the money to buy what she wanted herself. As the morning began, the hustle and bustle began. Amber arrived at 9 with 2 large bags. She started setting the table. Emily was minding her own business. She took the history of the patient they had traveled to with the doctor at the time. The woman quickly ran her eyes over the test results. "Yeah, nothing much," she sighed. There was a slight elevation in the proteins in the general analysis, but it wasn't critical, just a fraction of a percent. Isaac Alexander is probably right. What if it all works on the principle of a wave and there was a failure? Then the indicators normalized. But it's already having repercussions. That's several cycles in a row. Emily wasn't a doctor, so she didn't really look into the problem. She didn't have the knowledge or experience. Amber came in. "Everyone is already in the nurse's room," she reported. Isaac Alexander looked tired. Everyone congratulated Amber. Emily slipped money into her pocket. The birthday girl glowed. "Most importantly, we wish you a speedy marriage." Annie raised her juice glass. "We're tired of waiting for you to find one." "Did you find him?" Amber said cryptically. "You won't believe it, just like I wanted. Tall, dark hair, green eyes, dimpled chin, about my age." "Wow," murmured the female half. Isaac Alexander was silent, but he looked pleased. "He came up to me on the street," Amber cheered. "He even wears a watch like I like, with a big face." Emily swallowed. Something niggled in her chest. She chased away the bad feeling. "And my favorite name is William," Amber declared. "Soon we'll be together, and I'll finally wear my wedding ring." The co-workers sat for half an hour, needing to return to their posts. Emily was pale. She didn't fully realize why she felt so heavy. The nurse walked over to her colleague, pretending to help her clear her desk. "Amber, I'm so happy for you," Emily said. "I hope your prince isn't married." "He's in the process of getting a divorce," she said happily. "Billy was unlucky with his wife, so it's her own fault she left him." "Does he have children?" Emily held her breath. Amber looked at her questioningly. "I'm worried about you. I don't know what's going on." "Well, yes, daughter," calmed the birthday girl. "Why are you being such a baby? I'm not completely stupid. I know what I'm doing." "Yes," Emily smiled wryly. "Once again, I wish you well." Emily returned home the next day, but she still had her doubts. She could hardly wait until evening. It was about 11 p.m. when her husband returned. "Hi," she went up to him. "William, we hardly see each other." She lowered her eyes. "Emily, what do you want? It's a big city. You can't just live here. You've got to make it work," he smiled. "You know, I've been thinking about it, and I think you're right. I want to have a daughter," his wife said suddenly. William was taken aback at first, then put his arms around Emily and kissed her. "I'm glad you said yes," he said in a pleased tone. "It will be good for both of us." Emily calmed down that evening, falling asleep in her husband's loving arms. She didn't want to think about Amber or her fiancé anymore. Nearly 2 more weeks passed. Emily had already forgotten what had happened at her coworker's anniversary party. Emily arrived early that day. Amber was dealing with a difficult patient. She had her cell phone on her desk. Suddenly it rang. Emily glanced at the screen. It said "Beloved." Something hot pulsed through her entire body. There was no response, and the phone went silent. Amber walked over. Emily informed her that someone had called her. The woman immediately grabbed the phone, pressing all the same name. Emily somehow miraculously looked at almost every digit of the number, except the last 2. The magazine fell out of her hands, and she hesitated, but Amber had already gone to the window. In a soft voice, she was telling her lover something. Emily sat down at the table. Everything in her head was upside down. For her, it was a matter of life and death and 2 numbers. God, was that really pounding in her temples? Emily quickly grabbed her phone, called her husband. The phone was busy. Her heart nearly jumped out. She kept pressing and pressing William's number. Tears streamed from her eyes. Finally, the dial tone went off. Amber came to the table. "Emily, what's wrong?" "I'm at the facility," Billy's husband spoke quickly. "The landlord arrived, giving us a scandal. I called the supervisor." Emily didn't know what to say. "I was just worried," she barely said. "And for good reason." He sighed. "The boss won't pay us, and I'm so sick of it. You work, and then bang. For some reason we did nothing, and the house is shiny and the roof is intact, but somehow the owner doesn't see anything." Emily could barely contain herself, wiped away her tears, and went to the nurse's room. She was in a complicated emotional state. On the one hand, she felt like she was being cheated, and that made her seized with pain. On the other hand, she felt like it was all a coincidence, and she was just screwing with herself. "Emily, come here." The door opened suddenly, and in walked Dr. Isaac Alexander. It was still 30 minutes before the start of her shift. Isaac Alexander's request seemed odd. Emily cleaned herself up so as not to give away her tears and made her way to the doctor. He asked her to sit down. "I'm going on a business trip," he said seriously, "and I need an assistant. I've already made arrangements with the head doctor. Tell me, what about your family? Will it be possible for you to be away for a few days? I know you have a son." "Yes, Andrew is 11 now," the nurse replied, stammering. "He's independent. He mostly gets himself home from his training and club." In all her years at the hospital, this was the first time she'd ever been sent on a business trip. "All right then. Lily will be out tomorrow," Isaac informed Alexander. "And I'll pick you up at 8. Be ready." Emily sat back in her chair, but the doctor was already immersed in his work. The nurse had left. "Why me?" she whispered. "Wouldn't Amber be more suitable? She didn't have a family." It wasn't that Emily didn't want to go, but the whole thing seemed odd. Isaac Alexander never complimented her, and he never spoke to her except on business. Lily arrived in the evening, replacing Emily at the doctor's request. Now the nurses had to work together for a few days in 3 houses. Emily's husband couldn't believe his eyes. "What happened?" he asked. "I'm going on a business trip tomorrow," she said. "For 3 days. Billy, please take Andrew. He gets off much earlier than I do. It gets dark outside at 8 and he's home by half." "Mom, don't worry about me." Her son came up to her. "I'm not a little kid anymore." Yeah, she patted him on the head. "Andrew, you can already say that you are a man?" "Have you sorted things out at work?" Billy asked. "Did you get paid?" "Yeah, our foreman came by with some guys. Anyway, they worked it out," he said. "Do you know what a drag this is? Last month we didn't get paid for the repairs, which is almost $25,000 each." Emily hadn't thought much about it, but now she saw that almost every month someone would underpay or deliberately lower the price. All in all, William's job was precarious. Emily sighed. In the morning, a car pulled up at 8 sharp. She grabbed her bag, headed to the doctor's office. He greeted her coldly. "Where are we going?" She couldn't help herself. "It's the first time I'm going on a business trip to a village," he replied calmly. "We will spend the night at my relative's house. The residents have recently had serious kidney problems, and the region has asked me to take a look. Will you help me take tests, give injections?" What could it be, Emily wondered. Some kind of waste being dumped. "That's the thing, there aren't any businesses there," Isaac Alexander replied. "They sent me an ultrasound. His kidneys are in a deplorable state, even to the point of kidney failure. The hospital in the municipal center is already overcrowded. I'm looking at those who are at home now. The local paramedic can't cope. We'll take the blood and urine to the lab this afternoon." Emily realized they had a tough job ahead of them. It was about the critically ill. At almost 11 o'clock, they pulled into the village. It was like a ghost. The streets were empty. Isaac Alexander stopped near one house and entered himself. After a while, he called out to Emily as well. "The master is in the hospital now," he said. "He knows I'll be with you for a few days at his place. Don't be afraid." The medical staff quickly dropped their belongings and began to go door to door. The pain and suffering made Emily's blood boil in her veins. Many lay half asleep. The paramedic was giving them painkillers, as there was nothing else he could do. Emily saw Isaac Alexander coldly examining one patient after another. She took blood and urine for analysis and placed them in special containers. "Now into town," the doctor commanded. "We were promised emergency tests. We don't have much time." "What do you think? Did you find something?" Emily looked at him with interest. "Isaac Alexander, is this some kind of epidemic?" "No, I think it's something in the water," he replied. "I've already collected 5 samples from the wells. We'll stop at the river and the lake on the way now. We'll have to take a look." They quickly took all the necessary things and drove into town. The doctor was silent. He was thinking hard about something. "It looks like oil," the doctor's voice finally broke the silence. "The toxic effect of heavy metals." "If there aren't any factories around here, then what is it?" Emily hesitated. "You know, the best way is to walk around the village with a metal detector. And everything will fall into place at once," the doctor sighed. "Some idiot buried some heavy metal residue somewhere. God knows what he did with them. But if we're talking about some kind of manufacturing, it's very possible." "But how? I mean, they check cars at checkpoints. How could they smuggle this stuff in?" "Well, lead, cadmium, arsenic, for example. I'm not sure about mercury. Aluminum doesn't have such an effect on humans. They're more afraid of it. But the others, it's enough to lose 5 or 10 pounds somewhere near the source. And they didn't do it now. Maybe 6 months ago. It's just that now it's all gone into the groundwater and it's coming out of the wells." The car stopped outside the local hospital. Emily realized they'd come to the next town over. This whole situation was freaking her out. Isaac Alexander took all the biological material to the laboratory and started talking to the head doctor. And Emily stood aside and thought about her own. Until almost 3 o'clock, the doctor was busy examining the injured patients. Unfortunately, 3 had already died. The kidneys were too seriously damaged. In addition, the small town hospital did not have expensive medicines. It was almost 8 when Isaac Alexander approached Emily again. She, too, helped him from time to time. "We're going home," he said. "We'll stop at some store on the way. Get something for dinner," the doctor offered tiredly. "Unfortunately, my relative hasn't gotten any better. All we can do is wait." "Emily, did you have to travel so much during the day that you couldn't even talk?" Isaac Alexander himself went to the store, bought food and water. Back in his college days, he made scrambled eggs in the kitchen. "Although you could say, nothing has changed in my life since those times. I'm not a foodie at all. I don't have enough time for that." "I'm not much of a cook either," Emily smiled, "although my family status obliges me to. But family is always a support," replied Isaac Alexander. "I can't say that I don't like loneliness," but sometimes he fell silent. "I heard that your wife died," Emily ventured. "I'm sorry." "Well, that was a long time ago," he sighed. "Besides, I'm so caught up in my work that I try not to think about it. Well, let's drink tea and go to bed. Tomorrow is not going to be an easy day. Perhaps we'll be able to get some results." Emily cleared the table. Isaac Alexander showed her the room to make her own bed in the next room. The woman had already called her husband. He was home. Andrew was already asleep. The busy day kept Emily from returning to her thoughts. She closed her eyes. A green meadow appeared in front of her, and Emily heard some voices. The vision turned into a dream, and the woman fell deeply into it. She awoke abruptly. Though still light at heart, the dream did not bode well for her. She was marrying William, saw her beautiful dress, her veil. "Something will happen," she muttered, and she heard the door creak open. But something was catching. The doctor was already up, putting the kettle on in the kitchen. Emily came to her senses, and having changed her clothes, left the room. "Good morning," he said as dryly as before. "Let's have breakfast. We need to see the patients, and then we'll go back to the city." Both were silent, drinking coffee. Emily even liked Isaac Alexander's company. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry. Toward the end, she couldn't take it anymore. "Why did you take me? After all, I have not worked with you for so long," she asked. "That's exactly the reason. I know the others very well," he said seriously. Emily was silent. She didn't quite understand what the doctor meant, but she didn't ask. 2 of the patients got worse. They had to be sent to the hospital. Isaac Alexander didn't seem nervous, but Emily could tell by the way his cheekbones moved. The city had gotten the first results. The prognosis was unfavorable, but just as I thought, lead and arsenic, he sighed. They dumped something right where the artesian pools were, brought the waste in and just poured it out of the barrels. Emily was shocked, but from the results, the water was the problem. The heavy metal levels were more than 20 times higher. The administration had already banned the use of the spring water for any purpose. Since few people kept livestock in the village, the deaths were not so widespread. The goats suffered the most. Isaac Alexander called the region time and time again, beating out the necessary drugs. The case reached New York. It was impossible to delay it, threatened the death of people. More doctors came to the village from other districts. The seriously ill began to be sent to places where there were opportunities for treatment and could be connected to the machines. The 3rd day was over. Emily and the doctor were going home. The relative they were staying with was feeling better, so there was hope for Isaac Alexander. "Is that your brother?" Emily asked him on the way home. "I'm very happy for him and for you." "No, he is my wife's brother," Isaac Alexander answered. "After her death, we sometimes communicate." Emily sank back into herself, remembering last night's dream. Her whole body was covered with goosebumps. Actually, they were supposed to arrive tomorrow morning, but Isaac Alexander decided to return at night. Emily didn't bother calling the household, carefully opened the wicket gate, then inserted the key as well, and the front door opened. The house was dark. Emily went in to see her son. He was asleep. She headed to her room, and William was gone. Her wife walked to the hall, but he was absent there as well. She walked toward the garage. William always drove the car in for the night, and to her amazement, the car wasn't there either. Emily felt dizzy and dialed William. He didn't answer. It was 2 on the clock. God, where is he? She sobbed. Her nerves had frayed over the last few days, and Emily couldn't keep her cool. She could barely sleep. She had to stay home tomorrow, and her shift started the day after. Mom, hi. Andrew was surprised to see her early in the morning. I thought I would see you only in the evening. Son, where is father? She asked in a trembling voice. Did you see him last night? Yes. When I went to bed, he was at home. Andrew answered at once. Yeah, he'd already left for work. Look at the time. Dad's got a big order now, so he's leaving early these days. So you haven't seen him in the mornings? Emily asked. Andrew, answer me. No, shrugged his son. Mom, what's going on? We weren't even expecting you until tonight. Dad said you'd go straight to work from your business trip. That was right. That was Emily's plan at first, but the other post nurse gave her until tomorrow morning to rest. Emily had forgotten to warn William about that. Something's not right here, she thought. When Andrew left for school, she wondered, where has he been sleeping all this time? It's no use asking him. I must find out for myself. William opened his eyes and stretched sweetly. Amber lay next to him. She was still asleep. The man got up and began to dress. This has to end, he muttered to himself. Our affair had gone on too long. Still, William couldn't help himself. He didn't know what he wanted. He didn't want to lose Emily, because she was a reliable person. With her, he could spend a peaceful old age. And if anything, she would look after him. On the other hand, he was bored. He stood and looked at himself in the mirror and saw great potential. Except with Emily, it wasn't being realized. He wanted passion, crazy emotions, in general, everything that usually happens with mistresses. William forgot about Tammy all too quickly. He no longer felt bad about it, and Emily wouldn't know about it. Well, he'd go out for a couple months. It's nothing. He'd still be with his wife, he thought. The most interesting thing was that only in the middle of the novel William learned that Amber works in the same hospital where his wife works. Moreover, they were, you could say, co-workers. This confused William at first. He immediately wanted to break up with Amber, but she was so into him that he realized not yet ready to leave her. That's how they met. According to the man, he was in the process of divorce because of a worthless wife. Naturally, he was unhappy. And since he was earning well and gave Amber good gifts, she had already made plans for him. She had to marry William, and at any cost. For a very conflicted Amber, who could not get along with anyone until 40 years old, it was the last chance. So the woman wasn't backing down. Good morning, Kitty, heard the man behind him. Are you awake already? Come here. She held out her arms to him. Amber, I'll finish one thing and we'll have a serious talk, William smiled. Yes, I hope it's about our future, her eyes lit up. Billy, when are we going to be together? About our future, he answered. Except William was going to talk about ending the relationship, not continuing it. Amber pulled her lover toward her. She was happy. She had no doubt that everything would be her way now. Amber had wanted to quit her job for a long time. She was fed up with it already. William looked so much like the kind of man who could provide for Amber. She had been living the dream of him for the last few weeks. Amber was ready to write her resignation letter tomorrow, but she needed assurances. Until William put an engagement ring on her finger, there was a chance he'd run away from her. Amber's sharp tongue scared off even the most patient men who seemed to love her. All in all, the lovers made different plans for each other. William had cooled his passion, and Amber no longer stirred a storm of emotion in him. He quickly turned on his phone and turned pale. Emily had called him many times, and at night. Okay, I need to get to work. The chief has already called several times. He quickly rushed out of the house. What's her problem? He thought as he got in his car and drove away from Amber's house. Around the corner, he stopped. Emily, hi, he heard his wife's voice. I'm sorry, I slept at the site. Didn't hear you call? Billy will talk to you later, she sounded angry. I'm busy right now. William flinched. Something told him that Emily didn't believe his fables. Okay, later means later. He threw the phone down angrily and drove to work. Basically, they had already finished the renovations. They'd had a few days of downtime, and he'd spent all that time at Amber's place, coming over only in the evening so his son wouldn't suspect anything. I should have broken up with her when she told him she was working at the hospital, the man said angrily to himself. God forbid Emily finds out. She wouldn't forgive me this time. I don't need Amber for nothing, but I'm not leaving Emily. The man didn't even see himself contradicting himself. In his mind, it was normal to have an affair on the side and then kiss his wife as if nothing had happened. William thought that if he was living with Emily, it meant he loved her. There are no other options. He drove up to a friend's house with whom they worked together. There was nothing to do, and he didn't want to stay at Amber's place either. She'd already gotten everything she wanted the night before, and William was tired of her. But the mistress herself didn't think so. Billy, can you get out for half an hour? I really need your help, she called to him. He went outside so his friend wouldn't hear him. Yeah, I bought something here, something heavy. I need you to come over. The cab didn't want to take me. All right, where are you? I got it. I'll be there in 15 minutes, he promised. Emily was very angry with her husband. She felt like this was all some kind of game. The evidence that William was hiding something was too obvious. His excuses didn't convince her. Emily couldn't find a place to be. She was very tired, but she couldn't sleep. She decided to go downtown to get some distraction, to go shopping. Emily got off the bus with no mood and headed towards the mall. She sat down on a bench. It was nice out, she sighed and looked around, and her gaze fell on the cars standing near the building. In the far corner, she saw some woman kissing her beau. Emily looked closely, but didn't see anything unusual. The lovers were too far away to see them in detail. But a car pulled away, and suddenly Emily saw that it was their passenger car. She had no doubt about it. Cab. She ran up to the car with the checkered license plate. Please follow that blue Lada, just so they don't see us. We're in pursuit, laughed the cabbie. I hope there won't be a shootout. No, Emily said angrily. I don't have a gun. I don't carry them in public. The man froze in his seat. He didn't really like the passenger's joke, and they drove for about 20 minutes. William turned down a street. The cabbie followed him. The car stopped and Amber got out. The cab drove past. Emily tried to hide so she wouldn't be seen and saw her husband pulling something heavy out. It was a struggle for the woman to get home. She was torn by unbearable pain. She was alone, screaming for relief. At first she wanted to call her husband and tell him everything, but then she pulled herself together and wrote a message to her son that she would go to work today. She arrived at the hospital that night, asked her shift worker to go home. Emily, what are you doing here? Her lips quivered. I'm fine. I thought I'd let Lily rest. I'll be on duty tonight. Can't you, Alexander? Looked at her pale face, answered nothing, went to his room. Emily didn't know he was sleeping at the hospital tonight, too. He'd gotten a good night's sleep during the day. While they were gone, a patient had been brought in who urgently needed help. He had to be under constant observation for at least a couple days. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Emily sat in the nurse's room, crying. She didn't want to live, even though all of this was obvious. Emily didn't think she couldn't live through it this time. I'm sorry, Andrew, she whispered. Son, but I can't go on like this. She moved the jar of medication toward her. She didn't have the strength to fight anymore. She gave up, brought a mug of water to her lips, trembling, poured the pills on the table. Everyone slept so she would be found dead in the morning. Emily was so absorbed in her pain that she didn't even hear the footsteps. She put the palm of her hand to her mouth with the pills. What are you doing? Isaac Alexander rushed to her, grabbed the nurse's hand, and all the pills flew to the floor. Emily, what's going on? He squeezed her palm so tightly that she even shrieked. The woman stared at him blankly. The doctor opened the faucet, drew water, poured it over her head with lightning speed. What are you doing? I'm wet. She came to her senses. She waved her hands away from the doctor. Isaac Alexander still managed to wipe her hair with a towel. He pulled the woman against him. Emily hugged him and sobbed loudly. "It's all right," he said in a gentle voice. "Emily, you're going to feel better now." He grabbed the nurse and dragged her into his office. He quickly took out some pills and threw them into a glass of water. Emily managed to drink them down. She was trembling. Isaac Alexander kept stroking her head. She began to calm down. "Thank you," she whispered. "Oh my God, I almost poisoned myself." She didn't even have the strength to cry. Isaac Alexander put her on the couch and stayed with her until she fell asleep. "Stupid girl," he scolded as he returned to his office. "No problem is worth taking your own life." Around 6, Emily opened her eyes and immediately remembered what had happened. She felt both ashamed and hurt that she could have died. She opened the door. Isaac Alexander was asleep. She gazed into his face. It was filled with light. "I guess there are angels on earth after all," she thought. That's how kindness and a desire to help people hide behind coldness and calculating. Isaac Alexander seemed so dear to her. Emily sat quietly in her chair and watched him. She didn't know how much time had passed, but at one point the doctor opened his eyes. "How long?" he asked immediately. "Emily, are you okay?" "Yes, thanks to you, I didn't make a fatal mistake. Otherwise I wouldn't be here," she lowered her eyes. "Can you tell me what happened?" The doctor sat down on the couch. "Judging by what you wanted to do, something serious." "My husband cheated on me." And not for the first time, tears flowed down her cheeks. "When we were still living at home, he had an affair with our neighbor." And now Emily was silent. "And now my husband is having an affair with Amber, remember? She told me at her birthday party that she'd met a prince. Well, it was him. I saw them together. Yeah, it's Santa Barbara." Isaac Alexander scratched his head. "But if he's such an unreliable man, then he's hardly worth you taking your life because of him." "I certainly won't now. It was some kind of obsession. I don't know how to explain it to you. I was in so much pain," she whispered. "I understand. I was in the same situation myself once. After my wife died, I didn't want to live either. I tried slitting my wrists once, but I couldn't. And the second time I wanted to hang myself. But all the time someone held me back. I trusted this force, and now I am grateful to God that he did not allow my death. You have to live, no matter how difficult it is. It's the only way to understand why we've been given all this." Emily calmed down. She realized clearly that she would not stay with William, no matter how much their son suffered. She could never forgive her husband again. By 8, Amber came in, radiant. Emily was as cold to her as ever. "Were you tortured last night?" She was outraged. "Why are you looking at me like I'm the enemy?" Emily went to change. A doctor approached the post nurse. Isaac Alexander asked her to come in to see him. "You wanted to see me?" Amber tossed the doctor nonchalantly. "I see Semyonov hasn't gotten any better." "Yes, but this isn't about him," the doctor replied calmly. "Amber, I'd like us to have a private conversation." The nurse jumped. The first thing that came to her mind was that Isaac Alexander would be imposing on her as a fiancé. "Amber, a bad situation has come up," he began, "and I don't even know how to tell you about it." "What is it?" The woman exclaimed impatiently. "If you want to ask me out, I'm sorry, I'm busy." "That's exactly what this is about. Amber, are you going to marry someone else's husband?" Isaac Alexander's cheekbones flared. "I don't know how this mistake happened, but your fiancé is Emily's husband. She saw you outside the mall yesterday. She followed you in a cab to your house. Her husband gave you a ride," Isaac Alexander pointed out. What a load of crap. Amber jumped out of his office and started calling her lover. "Billy, answer quickly." "Your wife, Emily." William disconnected immediately. Amber tried calling him many more times, but he blocked her number. Emily had already gone home, so she couldn't talk to her in person. William realized he was busted, angry at himself, but he had to get out of it somehow. The best option was to disappear out of sight for a few days for now to figure something out. Amber dialed up her rival. She was insanely angry, except the woman didn't realize that Emily had nothing to do with it at all. "You stupid fool," she yelled into the phone. "Why are you slandering me? Are you trying to make me look bad? You're having an affair with Billy and you want to get rid of witnesses." "Amber, what are you talking about?" Emily tried to talk to her calmly. "Are you the one going out with my husband? I didn't interfere with your family." "You're lying," Amber screamed. "Are you sleeping with that asshole? I saw you. So you're cheating on your husband? The bitch loves my Billy." The woman didn't want to admit she'd been caught. It wasn't even that William had inherently lied to her. Amber didn't want to admit she'd gotten herself into such a messy mess. She just couldn't. Her reputation wouldn't let her. Amber was ready to tear everyone apart. William still hadn't returned her calls. The woman had worked her shift, but she wasn't going to let it go. "Well, I'll show you," she threatened Emily. "The bitch couldn't hold on to a man, and now she's blaming me." Amber had already realized that William was really her husband. But instead of being angry at him, she focused all her hatred on Emily. "I'll show you. You'll be kicked out of the hospital," she threatened. "You idiot. She got a man like that." Emily couldn't reach William either. Her son came home that evening, so she decided to talk to Andrew. "Son," she sighed, "you're a big boy and you understand something about life." Looked at him, mother. "It happens that adults can go their separate ways." "Did you and your father have a fight?" The boy guessed. "I won't get involved. If Dad leaves us, I won't feel guilty anymore," he reassured her. "Thank you," Emily hugged him. "Andrew, I love you so much." She already wanted to fly out of this cage to freedom, and she finally calmed down. She no longer saw any obstacle to staying with her husband. She had endured almost a year for her son's sake, but William had not changed. And Emily had no idea what problems lay ahead. Emily entered the hospital. She hated to cross paths with Amber, but Amber was waiting for her. Remember, she whirled her hands in front of her face. "I'm not to be trifled with. Is it your fault that Billy cheated on you? I know what was really going on between you two. He told me everything. The other guy would have kicked you out of the house a long time ago." She was yelling really loud on purpose. "What did he tell you?" Emily asked with her arms crossed over her chest. "Did he catch me with a man?" "That," too, Amber said angrily. "I can see why you got your hands on that robot. Billy told me how you were having an affair with the guy in charge at your house. He wouldn't leave you for your son." The whole hospital was buzzing about Emily sleeping with Isaac Alexander. Naturally, Amber did it deliberately to cover her dirty deeds. Now, there were few people who believed Emily's words, even if she did say that Amber had been out with William. Emily knocked on the door to the doctor's office, walked in and couldn't stand it, covered her face with her hand and sobbed. "Emily, what happened?" He came up to her. "Did your husband hurt you?" "No. Amber told everyone that you and I were lovers. Can you believe it?" she sobbed. "What the hell is that?" He swore. "She's confused about her connections. She can't see what's true and what isn't. And the worst thing is that everyone believes her." Emily looked at him with eyes full of tears. "Idiot." She asked for it. He left the office abruptly. "I'll cut her down." After lunch, the head doctor summoned Amber to his office. Isaac Alexander and Emily were already in the office. Amber Stevens, the chief, addressed her. "On what grounds did you decide that your co-workers were engaging in lewd behavior at work? Did you see it with your own eyes?" Amber really wanted to lie, but she felt the consequences would not be pleasant. "No," she said quietly, her eyes downcast and silent. The head doctor gave her a hard look. Unfortunately, he did something she had not expected. He paused. "You are fired," he said loudly. "Bring a statement, and I'll sign it." "Take it easy," the head doctor said. "Amber like you are a pond, and real specialists like Isaac Alexander can be counted on the fingers. If you had a brain, you wouldn't be making all this up. Amber walked out of the head doctor's office in crocodile tears, and her career was over. Her job didn't seem so bad now. Amber had gotten a small house from her first husband, so basically she'd settled into life pretty well. Now she had no money and no job. Emily thanked the doctor for his support and got to work. She decided not to wait any longer. Tomorrow morning she would try to find her husband. "Isaac Alexander, let me use your phone to make a call," Emily asked the doctor before leaving. "My husband doesn't take my calls." The doctor handed her the phone and left the office. Emily had a feeling William would answer it for her, since the call could have been from a potential client. "Hello," the wife spoke quickly. "I'm filing for divorce. There can be no talking. Your half of the house I'll buy out." "Okay, I'll be there," William angrily replied and disconnected the phone. Emily drove home with only one question: where would she get the money for the house? Perhaps there was something her parents could do to help her. Maybe he would agree to match the alimony? The thought crossed her mind, though I'd even agree without them, just so he'd be out of my life. Before Emily could enter the house, William appeared on the doorstep. Andrew was already at school. "Please don't be silly," Emily said immediately. "Billy, we're adults. Everything has to be paid for. If you didn't understand anything after the first time, you'll never understand again." William didn't really engage in dialogue. He agreed to give up his share of the alimony. Basically, he was making good money. He packed some things and left. Emily was overjoyed. As she found out later, he'd moved in with Amber. The latter walked around with her head held high and said that she was right all along, but as soon as she got what she wanted, she started acting like she always had. That's why William never even got married. 6 months later, he packed up his things and left in an unknown direction. Amber had no choice but to badmouth him now. It wasn't like she could make a fool of herself. It was always someone else's fault in Amber's life. The relationship between Emily and Isaac Alexander, on the other hand, had become friendlier and warmer. "Emily, come see me," the doctor called her one day. "It's an emergency," he asked. Emily rushed over. The doctor was standing by the window, as he always did. He had a cup of coffee in his hands. "It's my birthday today," he smiled. "Would you like to keep me company? It's been so long since I've celebrated it. Do you want to take Andrew with you?" And go where her eyes lit up. "Isaac Alexander, I suggest someplace quiet." Andrew chatted with his father. To his mother's surprise, he'd gotten through the divorce easily. He was already going on 13. "Young one, sit by yourself," the son replied to her invitation. "You, on the other hand, Isaac Alexander will bring you. You won't be bored alone at home." She hugged him. "Andrew, you're all grown up now, so I understand you two needing to babysit," he laughed. "Ma, I like him." "Nice uncle." Nobody called him uncle for sure, laughed his mother. "Okay, rest up." She ruffled her son's hair. That night was a new phase in the lives of both Emily and Isaac Alexander. 3 months later, they were married. And now Emily was taking care of him, keeping him from working so much. Of course, it was hard for Isaac Alexander to relax after so many years of hard work. But in their lives, there was another circumstance. Emily, almost 40, gave birth to his daughter. Isaac Alexander reduced the load at work to spend more time with his wife and children. They sold Emily's house and the doctor's parents' house, which was empty for many years. So they were able to travel a little and pamper the children. And they tried not to hurt themselves. Isaac Alexander was well paid for consultations in fee-based clinics. And Emily, as soon as her daughter grew up, returned to her home hospital.